If anyone has ever driven in Alabama, then you know it can be a creepy state to drive through. I'm not sure where to start. I've had a few experiences with the paranormal, which I plan to post here as I find the time, but this is my only cryptid experience. I'm not sure what we witnessed, but we got a good look at it in broad daylight. This sighting happened just before noon. My girlfriend and I had some time off work, so we decided on a much needed getaway for a long weekend. This was early 2019, late January or early February, so it was pretty darn cold. That being said, if you know anything about the southern USA, it doesn't get that cold. This was just one of those rare days when it was 30 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just trying to compile all the events surrounding the sighting, so bear with me here. We were on a highway in a swampy area. I have no idea the exact location, but I can say it was southern Alabama and close to Mississippi. There were lots of bridges. I wish we could have gotten pics, but the car was moving around 60 miles per hour when it happened. My girlfriend cries out for me to look, and I turn my head to get a glimpse of a grotesque looking creature. This thing was hunched down on all fours, possibly eating something. This all happened so fast, but I slow down and get a better look. All of a sudden, the thing stands on two legs and has a humanoid figure, all except the head. The head was goat-like, but it had the body of a man. There were horns, and overall, the head resembled that of a light-colored goat. The creature started back toward the woods, and we continued with our trip, but we couldn't stop talking about what we had just witnessed. I cannot be 100% sure of what we saw. This all happened so fast. My girlfriend swears it was a man with a goat head, and I'm certain that I saw the same thing. If anyone has any insight into cryptids of this type, or a similar sighting, I'd be glad to hear. This happened about 15 years ago, when I was living at my parents' house. I had just woken up and was lying on my back staring at the skylight, and I noticed a perfect, opaque black circle slowly starting to hover above my skylight into the frame from the far end. The skylight is just a little further down the room and parallel to my bed. It slowly moved in from the end, hovering toward the center above the skylight, and then slowly moved to the right and out of frame. It was about 7 a.m., and the whole incident lasted about 6 or 7 seconds. The closest thing I could compare it to would be one of those drones that look like fans. Except this was in 2005 or 2006. I'm not even sure those existed back then. It was about the size of a volleyball, very flat and completely opaque black. I can't imagine the neighbor kids playing with the drone above our house at like 7 a.m. back then. It was so strange. My family's from Oakland, California. This was 2012. I was 16, my brother was 12, and my parents were both in their mid-50s. One summer, we were on a road trip and ended up camping in the mountains above Lander, Wyoming. I remember sitting in the back seat behind my dad who was driving. We were on a dirt road above Sinks Canyon, and all the windows were open. It was July and very nice out. We pulled over by the turnout to one of the lakes to the right of us to look at the map. My parents weren't sure how to get to the campground on the other end of the several-mile road. About this time, a young lady came jogging from the other direction. I remember she was blonde, had on a yellow tank top and dark shorts. My dad waved out the window to her and called her over. He explained that we were lost and asked if she knew the area. She introduced herself as Amy. "I sure do. If you keep following this," she motioned toward the road in front of us, "it will take you to Lewis Lake. The campgrounds are going to be on your left." A few years later, I saw an episode of Disappeared that featured a runner who had gone missing in the late 1990s outside of Lander, Wyoming, and had never been found. When they showed her name, Amy Bechtel, and her photo, the hair on my neck immediately stood up. It was her. When we saw her, she appeared to be the same age and was wearing the same clothes described in the program. I showed my dad a few days later, but he didn't remember the specifics that I did. He remembered her name being Amy, but also thought that I was imagining things. My brother was asleep when this happened, and my mom didn't remember anything. But 5 years later, I know what I saw. It was Amy. So this happened sometime in April of 2019. I live in a decent-sized city in the western US. And my job at the time was in a restaurant where I work late nights, sometimes until 1 a.m. The job wasn't far from my apartment, so I would walk back every night. My place was in kind of a rundown part of town. Imagine a lot of abandoned lots. Basically, at that time of night, there would be no one around except people like me who were making their way home. So, I'm walking down the road leading up to my place one night. I'm looking down at my phone, and when I lift my head up, I see these two kids, probably like 40 or 50 feet away. And they were holding hands and walking in my direction. This was odd, because the road is a pretty straight shot. There wouldn't have been many alleys or side streets for them to come out of, unless they were just hanging out in one of the empty lots. They were too far away to make out any details, but I was sure that they had to be young kids. This on its own was unsettling, but the way they started behaving after this was what sent me into fuck this shit mode. These two stepped off the curb, looked both ways, and crossed the street. But there was no need to do that on a completely deserted road. But I thought, whatever, kids are taught to look both ways before crossing. That would have been fine. Except, after walking maybe 10 more feet, they stepped off again, looked both ways, and crossed back over the side that they were just on. They did this 4 or 5 times until they were right in front of me. I could tell at this point it was a boy who looked to be about 13 and a girl who looked to be about 9. Their clothing wasn't exactly like other black-eyed kid encounters I've heard, where they're wearing old-timey rags. Instead, they just had these gray pajama-looking things and white shoes with no logo or brand. Now, I'm a pretty big dude. I'm about 6'1", 240 pounds. I've been stopped and fucked with by all kinds of junkies and weirdos, and always thought I could handle myself. Despite all this, I felt terrified of these two little kids. They came up to me, and even though their eyes weren't solid black, their pupils seemed to be very dark, and they almost had a glow to them. They stopped dead in front of me, and the boy said, "We're lost. Our parents must be worried," in a straight monotone voice. You'd think that 2 lost children in the ghetto at 1 a.m. would be frantic and crying. The girl then chimed in, "We need to use the phone at your house. Our parents must be worried," in the same matter-of-fact way. I told them they could use my cell phone, or I could call the police. They didn't say anything, and the boy just said, "Our parents are worried." I don't know of any other situation where I would leave 2 kids there defenseless, but something in my gut told me to get the fuck out of there. So I just walked past them. After about a block, I looked back and saw them continuing in the other direction, repeatedly crossing the street again. It was one of the most unsettling things that I've ever experienced. I've spent 2/3 of my life trying to debunk this one, or at least come up with a reasonable explanation. When I was in 5th grade, I rode the bus with a girl who was a grade or 2 below me. We lived on opposite sides of a rather large apartment complex, but could still walk to each other's houses. Let's call her Mika. Mika was born in Romania. and had moved here a few years prior to me meeting her. She had heterochromia. She had brown eyes, but half of one of her irises was blue. This is relevant later. Her family was off. I went over to her apartment a few times to hang out with her and remembered seeing a lot of unusual decor in her home. Lots of candles, a few altars, and a lot of taxidermy. Her mother would get very upset anytime she brought friends over, so typically she would sneak myself and a few of our other friends in anytime her mom was out shopping. My mom was pregnant at the time and often felt sick, so I never brought friends over unless she was running errands or at the doctor's. She had never met Mika. A lot of the other kids were scared of her or felt uneasy around her. None of our mutual friends could explain why. I did too at times for some unknown reason, but as a fellow outcast, we stuck by each other's sides. After a few months of knowing each other, she started telling me that her family followed a belief system similar to paganism. I forget exactly what she called their religion. It wasn't Wicca or pagan or any other common, for lack of a better word, spiritual belief system. Mika started claiming that she had special powers. I immediately called bullshit and told her to prove it. She responded by telling me she would shapeshift into a cat and visit me later that evening. My family and I lived on the third floor of our apartment building. There were no fire escapes, balconies, or anything like that. We barely had window ledges. As a side note, I loved cute stuff. Hello Kitty, Care Bears, My Little Pony, all that. My best friend at the time was very into fashion and loved to act like a high schooler. The few times she saw me in cartoon PJs, she'd make jokes. So, I stopped wearing anything that looked like that to school or sleepovers, almost a full year prior to me meeting Mika. I went to bed at my normal bedtime of 9:30, wearing some Care Bear pajamas that my mom had bought me a week prior. Nobody had seen me in them aside from my parents. Around 3 a.m. that night, I woke up to what sounded like scratching at my window. I jumped out of bed, looked out my window, and saw a black cat staring directly at me. The cat was sitting on the very thin window ledge and raised its paw at me as if it were waving. Freaked out, I told myself I was dreaming and went back to bed. That morning, while my mom was cooking breakfast, she asked me if I'd heard anything weird outside the night before. I asked her what she meant. I saw the weirdest thing last night. I heard scratching at my window. I got up to see what it was and saw a black cat on the window ledge. It looked like she was trying to open my window. I sat there in silence, unsure of what to say. My mom continued. I was afraid it was going to fall, so I brought it inside, carried it downstairs, and put it outside. You should have seen its eyes. It had one eye that was half blue. I've never seen a cat like that before. I felt sick. I couldn't finish my breakfast. Not wanting to approach Mika after this, I stood off to the side, away from all the other kids, until she walked up to me. Hey Gloomy Bear, why didn't you let me in last night? I was stunned. I could have died. At least your mom was nice enough to take me downstairs. I stopped hanging around with Mika after that. Our building caught on fire a few weeks after this happened, and we ended up moving away. I haven't seen or heard from her since. To this day, my mom still remembers the cat. She'll mention it in passing every few years, and make comments about how weird it was, and that the cat could have gotten up on that ledge. For the last 20 years, I've been racking my brain looking for an explanation. If anyone has one, I'd love to hear it. I'm a single mom and live in a fairly large city in the Midwest. Just me and my toddler. It was winter when this happened, and there was a pretty fierce snowstorm blowing outside. I'm a smoker, so I still have to go outside and deal with the wind pelting my face with snow as I feed my final craving of the night before heading to bed. My porch is covered and has trees in front, so it's really hard to see in at night, and I never turn my porch light on when I go out to smoke. So, it was late, 11 or 12, and the street was deserted. Although I live in a big city, my neighborhood is really quiet at night, and my street dead ends at a park, so there isn't much traffic. As soon as I stepped outside, I could hear something in the distance. I spark up my cig anyways, and look down the street to where the noise was coming from. It sounded sort of like an animal growling. As the noise got closer, but was still about a block away, I could see a man walking. He was all in black. He had his hood up, and I couldn't make anything out beyond this. He was speaking in a deep guttural growl. It was the most demonic thing I've ever heard. It honestly did not sound human, but I know crazy can make people inhuman. It's hard for me to describe just how fear-invoking this voice was, but I also have a curious nature, so I stood frozen in the storm, like a deer in the headlights, watching and listening. I can't really remember most of what he said, but I do remember the phrase,
"This is the Book of the Dead."
He was walking on the opposite side of the road as my house, and had made it about half a block away. I had moved from directly in front of my door, holding my phone with a death grip in my pocket, and I'm smoking my cigarette as quickly as possible to get back inside. He was approaching the intersection right before my dead-end street, and I figured he would turn. I hoped he would. He didn't. He kept walking toward the dead end, still speaking in this deranged voice, incoherently, something about this Book of the Dead. At this point, there are a million things racing through my mind. He can't see me. He's just some random crazy. Even though he was just about right across from my house, I still couldn't make out any details of his face, or really see anything beyond the black hood. Suddenly, he stops talking, stops walking, and his hood slowly turns in my direction. I drop my cig, rush into my house, and lock the door, looking out the window to see what he does. He just stood there for probably 30 seconds, and then started walking again. He crossed the street and stopped again directly in front of the sidewalk from my door to the street. He stood facing my house for 3 to 4 minutes. I stood behind my locked door, staring at him as he stared back at me. Although he was only about 20 feet from me, his hood still concealed his face. I was debating internally if I should call the cops, the phone still clutched in my hand, but he honestly wasn't breaking the law in any way. He was just standing on the sidewalk, looking at my house. The standoff felt like it lasted an hour, with my heart leaping out of my chest. He was silent as he stood, and the only thing I could hear was the wind and pellets of snow tapping my windows. Finally, he turned and started walking again, speaking again in his growl. He kept on walking down the dead end and into the park. I could faintly hear his demonic voice through the door as he walked, and then that was it, and he was gone. I checked on my son, and he was sleeping soundly, although I can't say I did the same that night. My buddy Steve was a genius at making money without doing anything. At one point, he was enrolled in 12 different clinical trials at the same time. Some of these were for drugs that would have had bad interactions, but it didn't matter to Steve, because he never actually took the drugs. He did it like they do in the movies, and just slipped them under his tongue and then spat them into his hand when the doc was turned away. Other trials were for new therapeutic approaches and things like that, but those are no problem for Steve either. At most, he had to lie, literally and metaphorically, on somebody's couch for an hour each week, then collect his check on the way out. But eventually they caught on, and Steve was put on some kind of list. There was a nationwide ban on Steve, so they couldn't participate in any more trials sponsored by universities or private drug companies, which essentially precluded him from that easy money. But Steve found a workaround. Not all experiments are above board and sanctioned by the FDA or whatever. There is, in fact, a hidden world of people testing things out in their garages, streamlining the whole process without having to worry about pesky and expensive regulations. One of Steve's friends gave him a link to a forum on the dark web, and after that, he was in the pipeline. The thing about these experiments is that if they were for, say, a new drug, they didn't trust you to just swallow the pill. You had to open your mouth and lift your tongue. You had to actually take the thing, because these people weren't fucking around. But boy, did they pay. One morning, I was awakened by an insanely loud banging at my apartment door. "Who's that?" moaned my girlfriend, Sophia. I looked at the clock with blurry eyes. It was 5:55 a.m. "Open up, dude," shouted Steve from the hallway. "Oh, fuck him," said Sophia. "He could be in trouble," I said, shooting out of bed full of adrenaline. I answered the door in my boxers, and there was Steve, bouncing up and down, his pupils each the size of the full moon. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm awesome," said Steve. "Holy shit, dude. This stuff. They gave me $1,000 to take one fucking pill, and it rules so much. It feels so good. Oh my god, Jay. Oh my god." My head hurt as I tried to piece together a thought. "So you're high, and you came to tell me that you got paid a lot of money to get high." I felt a surge of rage welling up deep inside of me. Yeah, I mean, no. Look, man, you're my best friend. I love you. I love you so much. I want to... No, listen. I came here because, look, there's money. A lot of money for me and you. $20,000 for a video game, to play a video game or something. Dude, 20 grand to play a video game for a few hours. Look, I'm just telling you this because I love you. You don't need to take drugs or anything. Just some virtual reality stuff for a few hours, and boom, 20 grand in your pocket like that. The flood of rage died down as I tried to make sense of what Steve was saying. I couldn't. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Why are you here before the crack of dawn?" Sophia's pissed, and so am I, really. No, said Steve, with a horrified look on his face. "I want you to be happy. Sophia too. Look. You still have that Tor browser I set up for you and all that?" I guess so." Good, listen, look." Steve jammed his hand in his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. "Look, just type this in and you'll see. Easy money, okay? $20,000. You can finally buy that engagement ring that you..." I reached out and smacked Steve across the side of his head. "Jesus Christ, dude, keep it down, yeah?" Steve looked shocked and hurt for a moment before the realization dawned on him. "Ah, shit. My bad, man. My bad. I'm sorry. I wish I could delete it. I wish I could just delete it. Listen, are you going to check this out or what?" He held out the crumpled piece of paper to me. I took it and shrugged. "I'll check it out, Steve, but that's it for now. Why don't you head home and sleep this one off, yeah?" "Yeah," said Steve, nodding his head like crazy. "Yeah, check it out. I'll go sleep it off." I started to close the door, but he stuck his foot in just before it closed. Dude." "Yeah." "Can I use your bathroom?" I opened the door and sighed as he rushed into the bathroom and started puking his guts out. Steve received a ban from our apartment after that, but we stayed in touch. He would text me every few hours, asking if I'd checked out the advertisement for the video game trial yet. The truth was that I had checked it out as soon as he left that morning, but I was undecided. On the one hand, the $20,000 sure was intriguing. That was almost half as much as I made a year. More than half after taxes. And I had a feeling that this wasn't the sort of gig where they took taxes out. I'd be able to do a lot with the money. Take Sophia out for all kinds of dinners. Maybe take a vacation and travel somewhere interesting. The kinds of things we always wanted to do, but never could afford to. Then too, yes, there was the engagement ring. Sophia would say yes either way, even if I presented her with some rolled up aluminum foil. But I wanted it to be special, but I couldn't afford to make it special. On the other hand, well, the whole thing was sketchy as fuck. Who pays some Joe off the street $20,000 to test out a video game? And why go through such shady channels to set the thing up? I knew from the start that nothing good could come from it. I knew that, but I did it anyway. Alright, I wrote in a text to Steve. I'm in for the video game thing. My man, we're gonna be swimming in fucking caviar, my dude. Steve and I drove to the address together. It was, strangely, a respectable looking office building. We went up to the entrance and looked at the map of the building. There was a lawyer in there, a counselor, an accountant, and so forth. Shit, said Steve. Which fucking office is it? On cue, his phone buzzed. Oh, he said, the basement. The basement? I asked. Not for real. The basement? I don't know about this, man. Come on, dude. $20,000. And in such a nice building, too. I'm used to going to crazy people's garages and swallowing God knows what. This is gonna be cake. I nodded, but as we walked to the elevator, my sense of unease grew larger and larger until it was screaming at me. Turn around. Whatever this is, it's bad. It's just a video game, I muttered. What's that? Asked Steve. I snapped out of it. I said, let's go play this dumb video game and get paid. That's the attitude, said Steve, grinning, as the elevator door slid closed behind me. We rode down to the basement as I tried to calm myself down. It's a video game. In the basement of a respectable office. Probably they could only afford to rent the basement. I shut myself up before I could ask. They can only afford to rent the basement, but they're paying you $20,000 each? When we reached the bottom, the door slid open, and the first thing I saw was a man and a woman sitting at a plastic work table in the middle of a large room. Other than that, it looked like a standard basement with equipment like boilers and hot water heaters, and exposed wiring and concrete floors. Welcome, said the woman. Steven and Jason, is that right? That's us, said Steve, stepping off the elevator. I followed behind and watched as the woman wrote something on her clipboard. That's fantastic, said the man. Right on time. Well, a few minutes late, but that's okay. He laughed. It happens, said the woman, smiling. People have things to do, and we respect that here. That's why we're going to get right down to business. Or, nearly so. First, we need you to sign the contract. The woman held out 2 clipboards, and we each took one. Before I looked at it, I took a moment to note that my unease had not subsided, despite the surface friendliness of the man and the woman. Somehow, that made it even more bizarre, that they were just sitting there, so poised amongst the plumbing pipes running overhead, ready to offer us a lot of money to play a video game. Where do we play the game? I asked, looking around. I didn't see a TV or anything. Up here, said the man, tapping his head. I started, but Steve gave me a nudge. They'll tell us what to do, he said. Just sign the contract, dude. He scrawled some information into a few boxes and dashed off a signature while I read mine more closely. The participant agrees not to seek compensation beyond the predetermined amount. In this case, the predetermined amount is $20,000 US for participating in one trial game of Total Control, TC. The makers of TC and the administrators of the trial hereby relieve themselves of all liability for any injuries sustained during gameplay, with the express agreement of the participant. Injuries? I asked. What kind of game is this? The woman smiled. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to tell you anything about the game until you sign the contract. After that, you'll know all about it. In the event that the participant is unable to collect the predetermined amount at the end of the game, the makers of TC will transfer the funds to a person of the participant's choosing. The following box is for the participant to note the name and address of the next of kin. So you're saying that if we die, you'll give the money to somebody that we choose? I asked. Is that right? That's right, said the man. If we die while playing your game, I stressed. I turned to Steve. Dude, this is nuts. Steve shrugged. It's a lot of money, dude. Take it or leave it. I'm taking it. I tried to convince myself to leave it, but then I thought about going to Europe with Sophia. I wrote her name in the next of kin box and then signed the form. I handed the clipboard back to the woman, who scanned it over. Fantastic, she said. Now will you tell us what this game is? I asked. We'll do better than that, said the man. He reached down into a cardboard box on the ground and pulled out what looked to be 2 headsets. We'll show you the game. Please, gentlemen, put these devices on your heads and prepare for an experience unlike any other. Or so we hope, he added, laughing. Steve didn't hesitate to put the thing on his head. It looked like the front half of a helmet with an elastic band securing it in place and a pair of glasses attached to the helmet. I don't see anything, said Steve. It's a 2-player game, said the man, nodding to me. I took a deep breath. It's just a fucking game. I put the headset on and looked through the glasses. Everything looked the same, except it had a slight yellow tint. I watched as the man reached into the box again and brought out 2 video game controllers. He handed one to the woman, and then they each pushed a button. I heard Steve scream a split second before I heard the hiss of some hydraulic mechanism being engaged just above my ear. Then, I felt the most intense pain in my life. It felt like something was being jabbed directly into my fucking brain. And that's exactly what was happening. A trickle of blood rolled down the side of my head as my brain lit up with pain. Then, I was out of it. When I woke up, I was strapped to a chair, sitting opposite the man and woman behind their table, and next to Steve. There was only a dull ache in my head now, but it didn't take long for me to burst into full-on panic. Ah, good, said the woman. You're both awake. She stood up calmly, walked over, and undid my straps. What is this? I gasped. What the fuck is this? It's an experiment, said the man. Don't worry, we've ironed out some kinks since the last time we tried it. What experiment? I asked, standing up on wobbly legs. What are you gonna do to us? The woman went to work unstrapping Steve. We've implanted a device in your head, she explained. It allows us to control your physical movements. Or so we hope. Steve rubbed his head. What the fuck? You're gonna pay us, right? Of course, said the man. He reached into his cardboard box and pulled out 2 thick envelopes. I hope cash is okay. He tossed them across the table to our feet. Steve bent down and tore his open. I saw the cash inside. Okay, he said. That's worth it for a little headache, I guess. Alright, so you've implanted these devices in our brains. Okay, so can we leave now? You can try, said the man. But you won't be able to if we don't want you to, said the woman. And we don't want you to, said the man. Not until you fight to the death, said the woman. I jumped to my feet and tried to slow down my breathing. Come on, man, I said to Steve. That's enough of this. I bent down to pick up my envelope and then started walking toward the elevator. Thanks for the money, guys, said Steve. Then he followed behind me and pushed the button. The light came on and we waited for the elevator to come. Then, I reached my fist back and swung it as hard as I could at Steve's jaw. It connected with a loud crack, and I saw a spray of blood leave his mouth. What the fuck? Groaned Steve, rubbing his jaw. I felt dizzy. What the fuck indeed? Why had I just socked my best friend in the face for no reason? Dude, I'm so sorry. I have no idea why I did that. Steve spit out some blood on the basement floor. Forget it. Let's just get the fuck out of here. The elevator door dinged. Sounds good to me, I said as the door slid open. I went to step in when suddenly I felt a hand grab my shoulder and roughly spin me around. It was Steve. He had a confused look on his face as he grabbed my neck with both hands and started to choke me. My nerves exploded in panic as I struggled to breathe. I felt myself bring my knee up into Steve's balls. He let go of my neck and then hunched over. What's happening? He gasped. I brought my elbow down on his back and he screamed out in pain. I don't know, I said. I don't know. I looked over at the man and the woman still seated behind their plastic work table. They were each holding their game controllers and smiling. "What the fuck is happening?" The woman pushed a button, and suddenly Steve lunged at me, driving his shoulder into my gut. We hit the ground together, my elbow taking the brunt of the impact. "I'm so sorry," cried Steve. "I can't stop." I reached up and grabbed Steve's face in my hand. I didn't want to. I tried to make myself stop, but I couldn't. I began squeezing my thumb and middle finger, which were spread out and gripped into the spot behind his eye sockets. "Stop this," I shouted. Steve sunk into my palm with his teeth and tore a chunk of my flesh off. I felt a searing pain and a deep fear as he spit my skin onto the ground. I tried to will myself to stay still, but I couldn't. I punched him in the eye. When his head jerked back from the blow, I pushed against his chest and twisted around, so that now I was on top of him. I took a clump of his hair in my hand and began smashing his head against the concrete floor, again and again and again. I was crying. I was begging myself to stop. I was begging the man and the woman to stop whatever they were doing. I was begging Steve to forgive me, as his head hit the floor with a thunk that sounded wetter and wetter each time, as blood gushed and sprayed everywhere. "Okay," said the man after a while. "That's enough. My player's dead now." I heard the woman laugh. "I told you I'd win." Suddenly, I was in control of my own movements again. I set Steve's head gently on the ground and knelt next to him, sobbing. "What have I done? What did you make me do?" Now, said the man, standing up. "It's not all bad news." He walked over and picked up the envelope of cash that Steve had dropped. He did name you as his next of kin, so you've just made $40,000. I looked up at him with blurry eyes. "You fucking monsters," I said, standing up. "I'll fucking kill you." I ran at him full of rage, with my arms outstretched. But when I got to him, I slowed down, spread my arms wider, and embraced him in a friendly hug. My mind screamed in terror and rage, but my body wouldn't respond. "We control you now," said the woman. "We're happy to let it go at this. You served our purpose as a beta tester. We'll let you get in that elevator with your money, and you'll never hear from us again. If you honor your contract. You remember your contract, don't you? There's a copy of it in your back pocket. There's one bit that you should pay careful attention to. The bit about how you are never to tell anyone anything close to what happened here. Don't worry about coming up with an explanation for your friends. We'll take care of that. All that you have to do about all of this is literally nothing. Don't say a word. You're probably best forgetting it ever happened." "There's a hose in the corner," said the man. "Clean yourself up, take your money, and leave." I did just that. I just wasn't sure if I was the one doing it. After I killed Steve, my life fell apart. Of course it did. I knew that I wasn't in control of my actions at the time, but that didn't help at all. I'd watched the life leave his eyes, and I'd gone on smashing his head against the concrete again and again, well after he was dead. I had nightmares about it every night, and the worst part was that I couldn't tell anybody about it. What was I supposed to do? Turn myself into the police for murdering my best friend literally against my will? How would that help anything? I wanted to tell Sophia. I wanted to tell her so badly, but I couldn't. Those people had put the fear in me. We started doing fancy things together with the money, like going out to eat, but it was no good. It was like a part of me had died when Steve had died, when I had bashed the life out of him. Sophia didn't want fancy dinners and all the things that money can buy. She wanted me, but I wasn't there anymore. I started drinking more and more. I considered suicide. Not seriously at first, but as time went by, it seemed more and more like a viable option. Anything to stop the never-ending guilt and grief. For her part, Sophia stuck with me for longer than anyone could have hoped for. But finally, it got to be too much. It was clear that things were over well before the night we laid in bed together after yet another failed attempt at making love. "I can't do this anymore, Jay," she said. "I love you, but something changed after Steve's accident. I know that he was your best friend and it tore your heart out. But what about life? What about me? You didn't die. I didn't die. We're still here. And I can't do it anymore. It's been 3 months, and I don't think I've heard you laugh once. I'm not blaming you, and I can't tell you how much I wanted to be able to do this. It's my failure, really. But like I said, we're still alive, and I want to live while I can, and I want you to live too. I clenched my jaw, trying to fight back the tears. I tried to think rationally. If you really love her, you'll tell her to fuck off. But I didn't. I have to tell you something, I said. Then, as my soul screamed in horror, I smothered her with a pillow. I've been in bed with Sophia's corpse for 2 days now. Yesterday, I got this text. We have gathered all the data we need. Your contract has been fulfilled. Your unit has been deactivated. We thank you for your participation and wish you the best of luck. I don't know what to do. I'll start here by typing this out. My name is Jay, and I killed my best friend and the love of my life, but I wasn't in control of my body at the time. Where do I go from here? So last night, I went to bed around 1 a.m. As I was drifting into sleep, I started seeing this being lying in front of me. I clearly saw a misty white face. I couldn't recognize who it was. It then began sucking my essence out. I don't know how to describe it. It siphoned this white, snow-like material out of me. I saw and physically felt it flowing from within me outside of my mouth, and it was drinking it. I suddenly jolted awake from the almost sleep state, and it was still there. I still saw and physically felt my energy being drained. A few seconds into me being awake, it phased and had this facial expression as if it were suddenly panicked because I could see it. Whatever it was stopped, and it disappeared. I feel very drained today, like my body is missing something. I feel lighter, weaker, and emptier. I don't know how to describe it, but it's weird. It didn't feel hostile. It felt like it didn't want me to know it was there, and doing what it was doing. Has anyone experienced anything like this? This happened when I was around 7 to 12 years old. The nightlight would reflect an image of what appeared to be a woman's face. She looked old, around her 50s or 60s, with short curly hair and high cheekbones. The reflection was very detailed and very clear. I thought I was just imagining or looking too much into it, but I couldn't think of it as anything else but exactly a woman's face. It would creep me out at night, so much that I wouldn't be able to sleep. Sometimes, it even looked like she changed expressions. On some nights, I'd get a very, very creeped out feeling or bad energy in the room, and she looked like she was crying. I could see the tears running down her cheeks, and on some nights, she looked angry, and she was crying, and her tears looked like blood. And some nights, it was a bright plain circle. It gets weirder. This is the reason why I decided to talk about this. I have never mentioned it to my sister, because at the time, I thought I just had a vivid imagination, and I didn't want to scare her. 10 years later to this day, my sister casually mentions, I remember when we were kids, I used to see a woman's face on our ceiling, and it was the creepiest thing I've ever saw. I told her I thought I was the only one that saw it, and she mentions that it looked like she would change facial expressions, and looked like sometimes she was crying blood, or she'd catch her mouth open late at night like she was screaming. I have no idea what this was. I'm usually pretty skeptical of the paranormal, and the idea of this is very unsettling. I shit you not, my experience was exactly like the movie The Fourth Kind. I started seeing an owl at night when I was little, and I was terrified of it. I just knew that it was coming to get me. Over the years after that, I started having visions and dreams about being abducted and being in a white room with horrifying things happening to me. I remember this extremely bright white room and my body being translucent with a caterpillar worm type creature crawling through my eyes. There were also multiple times where I was able to see inside my own body, and I remember being poked with this weird needle thing that I remember feeling so vividly as being the most uncomfortable, cringy, painful thing that I've ever experienced to this day. It was almost an inhuman type of uncomfortable. All these dreams always happened after seeing the owl at my window, in which I was 100% sure I wasn't dreaming when I saw the owl. This happened many years ago. My friends, family, and I gathered together to go and enjoy a Saturday outing to the park. This park was your typical open field site, and the field was as large as 4 football stadiums. It had no playgrounds and not that many trees, so it was ideal to play catch or football. I was an active and sporty adolescent at this point, and so I decided to play a game of catch football with my friends. My friend and I decided to toss the ball around for a bit until the game began, as the rest of the gang were still settling in. Perhaps 10 minutes into the practice, my friend tossed the ball directly to me with pretty good precision, so that I only had to move about a foot to my right. But as the ball was coming up toward me, I looked up, and right above me, I saw what I can only describe to you as a black saucer. I'm trying to remember as it was many years ago. Mind you, I only saw the bottom of the object I was looking at, but oddly, the object remained steady. It didn't move or make any noise. At this age, I knew all about UFOs, but I wanted to make certain that I wasn't hallucinating it. I looked back down at my friend, and I told him to look up. That's when I noticed that he hadn't moved. Him and everyone else were fucking frozen. I yelled to grab the attention of family members, but got no answer. The whole field that had dozens of families enjoying their day, well, were all frozen in time. No one moved. Birds remained still in the sky. The air seemed dusty and had no scent. Now, I hadn't left my spot for the fact I was in shock, but I was surprised that I was able to move as normal. Here's the kicker. As I looked up to the sky once again, the object that was there had now disappeared. No noise, a beautiful clear blue sky, and no object. I looked back down at my friend and remained confused. And that's when I heard him say, "Hey, throw the ball." Everything had went back to normal. This all happened in a matter of seconds. I quickly asked my friend if he had seen the same object as I did, stupidly expecting him to say yes. He was confused, but knew how serious I was in the moment. He saw it in my face. He said no. I never spoke about what happened to me until years later, when I mentioned it to my spouse. I'm not sure what happened, but I do know I would not like to encounter it ever again. When I was 17, 18-ish, I was driving home from a friend's house after a movie marathon. It was around 1 a.m. when I left, and a decent drive. Not quite halfway, my gas light came on. I had had a few creepy catcall experiences at gas stations, and was a little paranoid stopping that late in the middle of nowhere as a 110-pound teenage girl. In the end, I think if I wasn't so cautious, I could have been kidnapped or killed. The first gas station I came across was well lit, and was in a pretty open space. I drove up to the pump and looked around my car mirrors before getting out. As I was starting to pump gas, this normal looking guy comes out of the gas station shop and starts smoking a cigarette. The pump kept clicking off and not working, so I started messing with it, trying to get it to pump. This guy starts watching me, laughing. I assumed he was just laughing to himself, watching a teenage girl trying to pump gas. After getting maybe a quarter of a gallon, I gave up and moved to a new pump. At this point, if I didn't do absolutely everything I did, I think I would have been screwed. When I got back into my car, I locked my doors just to drive to the other pump. I checked all my mirrors before getting out or shutting off my car again. It was an old 90s Beetle that didn't always start right away. That's when I saw the guy walking up to my car. He was smiling, walking up to the driver's side window. Not wanting him next to me, I rolled down the passenger window. He paused for a moment, then smiled to himself and walked to the passenger window. He stuck his head all the way inside my window to talk to me.
Hey, I know this seems really weird, but I promise I'm not a creep or anything. My car broke down.
He pointed to a red SUV in the parking lot.
And I need a ride home. It's just half a mile up the road.
Sorry, but I don't know you.
Oh no, I totally get it. I thought it was pretty weird as I was walking up here. But it's only like half a mile up the road. I'm totally stranded.
I wish I could help you, but I really don't know you.
Yeah, I got you. If you had a truck or something, I'd offer a ride in the back.
He looked expectantly. Sorry, no. All of a sudden, his demeanor flipped. He looked totally pissed. He yanked at my door, but I had locked it before. Then, he reached for my inside door handle through the window. My car was still running, and I slammed it into first and peeled out as he opened the door. The car taking off slammed it shut, and I sped off. I called the police after I got away. They looked at the gas station cameras, and right after I left, he got into his red SUV and drove off. If I hadn't locked my doors the second time, I think I would have been fucked. If I let him come to the driver's side window, he could have grabbed me. If I had shut my car off, I wouldn't have been able to drive off in time. And if I didn't double check my mirrors, I would have been outside my car when he came up to me. This story is definitely going to be hard to believe, but it's 100% true. It's a story that I've told very few people in real life, because I know how crazy it sounds. I know people here have had weird experiences too, and a lot of you know more about folklore and entities than I do. Hopefully, some of you can help explain what I saw. I'd love to hear your theories. This occurred when I was 11 or 12. I'm 28 now, and I was staying the night at my friend Danny's house, who lived just a few houses down from mine. There was a large pond behind our neighborhood, and we spent a lot of time there growing up. We go fishing, ride bikes, explore the small forest, etc. But we really enjoyed catching turtles and tree frogs. It might sound weird, but what can I say? We had somewhat of an obsession with reptiles and amphibians. Another thing I should note is that there's an old Native American trail that went through the backyards on our street. It wasn't the Trail of Tears, but it was related to it in some way. I don't really remember. Back to the story. I was up late playing video games with Danny, and after a while, we wanted to do something else. It was close to midnight, but we decided to go out and try catching some tree frogs. A family that lived in a nearby house had gone on vacation, and they had a perfect backyard for catching frogs. We hopped their fence and started exploring. Almost immediately, I started getting a weird feeling. I had the feeling we were being watched, or something was nearby. and there was this odd energy in the air. I don't really know how to explain it, but something just felt off. I remember feeling afraid, but I had no reason to be. We had done this kind of thing many times before, and it never inspired fear. About 10 minutes in, we thought we could hear the frog saying "help me" in a croaky, froggy voice over and over again. The weird thing was, we couldn't see any tree frogs with our flashlights, and the yard wasn't that big. They started chanting in unison, and that made it much louder. Feeling more than a little creeped out, we bolted out of there and back to the street. Now, we were standing under a streetlight on the street corner across from where the frog house was. I looked up at the light and noticed at least 15 dragonflies attached to each other like a human centipede. They were all doing a spiraling motion as they flew closer and closer to the light. It was weird. So, we heard and saw two unusual things, but you could possibly explain them away. What happened next, however, made absolutely zero fucking sense. After the dragonflies did their thing and flew away, Danny and I remained standing under that streetlight. We began talking about the strangeness of the frogs in particular. We both heard them croaking the same phrase, and we were pretty much just saying what the fuck was that about. At some point during the conversation, I was instantly overcome with the most intense adrenaline rush that I've ever had in my life. That feeling of fear without a source while at the frog house was back, but much, much stronger. It was like my fight or flight response was signaled for no reason. Once again, everything felt off, and it felt like there was an intense energy all around us, making the air heavy. I was terrified, and I found out later my buddy was feeling the same thing. I became as still as possible, listening intently to my surroundings. I didn't hear anything unusual, but I suddenly began to feel drawn to look at the street behind me. I knew something was there. Whatever was behind me was the source of my fear, and it was putting out overwhelming energy with its presence alone. I hesitantly turned around and looked. A side note, I have full-body goosebumps just recalling this. In the middle of the street, about 20 yards away from us, there was an ordinary-looking 5 to 7-year-old girl with long, dark black hair wearing a white nightgown. She was sitting Indian style on the street pavement with a doll on her lap, and she was combing the doll's hair with a hairbrush. I was pretty much terrified beyond imagination. I was frozen with fear and could barely think straight. There was an incredible amount of energy in the air, and I knew something wasn't natural. She looked innocent enough, but I felt like she could snap me in half with the snap of her fingers if she really wanted to. Another creepy detail was that she never even looked at us. She kept her head down and focused on her doll, but she definitely knew that we were watching her. After what felt like an hour, realistically, probably 15 to 30 seconds, a car turned onto the street and began heading down the hill toward the girl. I remember the headlights getting brighter and brighter as it approached her. You would think maybe I would try to save her real quick, but I legitimately couldn't move. Also, I didn't really expect her to get hit for some reason. I never felt like she was in any sort of danger. Eventually, she became lost in the car's headlights, never looking up from her doll this whole time, by the way, and the car just passed right through her without any sound of a collision. It stopped at the stop sign 15 feet from us and made a right turn. We took our eyes off of where the girl was as we watched the car turn. When we looked back to where the girl had been, she was gone. Instead, there was a dog on the sidewalk, precisely parallel to where the girl was sitting in the street. The dog was looking right at me when I noticed it, almost like it was waiting for me to see it. Then, it just turned around and trotted up the hill in the other direction. After a few seconds, the shock wore off and we sprinted back to Danny's house and spent half the night looking out his second-story window toward the street. I don't know what I saw, but Danny saw the exact same thing. I've always felt like there was a reason it happened, or a reason it showed itself, whatever it was, to us of all people. Last thing, the house in front of where the girl was seen was haunted. I lived on that street for 10 years, and 4 or 5 different families lived in the haunted house during those 10 years. All of them said it was haunted. I have a couple stories about that too, but this is already way longer than I wanted it to be. Anyway, thanks for listening if you made it this far. Please let me know if you have any theories on my experience. About 15 years ago, my uncle, my aunt, and my 2 cousins inherited a grandfather clock after my aunt's father passed away. It was more than 150 years old, beautifully carved wood, hand-painted panels showing scenes of 19th century rural life. The night before Thanksgiving, they set it up in their foyer and wound it so it would be running when the whole family came over the next day. After that, they finished prepping the house, setting out cups, arranging dishes, and getting everything ready so the morning would be easier. That night, my aunt and uncle were jolted awake by the sound of voices downstairs, followed by what sounded like marbles bouncing across the kitchen floor. My uncle assumed it was his twins fooling around, so he got up to tell them to knock it off. But as he walked past their rooms, he saw both kids sound asleep. When he went downstairs, the voices stopped, but the kitchen looked lived in. The cups they had neatly set out were moved around, like someone had been using them. Ice was scattered on the floor beneath the refrigerator dispenser. Somehow, he convinced himself it was nothing, and he didn't mention any of it to the family on Thanksgiving. But that was only night 1. Thanksgiving night, after everyone left, one of my cousins was lying in bed when she heard a little boy laughing in the hallway. Her door was open, so she glanced out and said she saw the shadow of a small boy run down the hall, followed by the shadow of a man wearing what looked like a top hat. In the morning, when she told her sister said she'd seen and heard the exact same thing. Needless to say, the next night, the girls slept in the same bed. They huddled together under the covers. Just as they were drifting off, they both awoke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, careful steps. They got louder and closer until it sounded like someone was pacing right in the room with them. One of my cousins, the one sleeping on the outside edge of the bed, finally pulled the blanket down just enough to peek, and she saw a shadowy figure standing there, staring. She screamed, hit the lights, and the figure vanished. My aunt and uncle ran in, and by then, both girls were crying and shaking. My aunt and uncle believed them instantly, as they had heard their own strange sounds. The worst part, they later said, was feeling completely helpless. They had no idea how to comfort their daughters. A couple of days later, my uncle had to leave town on a business trip. My aunt and the girls decided to camp together on an air mattress in the living room. They played a movie for background noise and eventually fell asleep. At 3:30 a.m., one of the girls woke up freezing. The room had turned ice cold, even though the heat was on. The TV sleep timer had shut off the movie, and when she looked toward the sliding glass doors leading to the back deck, she saw them. The silhouettes of a little boy and little girl, standing just inside the doors, holding hands and watching them sleep. She nudged her mom and sister awake, and both of them saw it. My aunt jumped up and hit the light switch, and instantly the children were gone. The room gradually warmed back up, while the kitchen, just a room away, had stayed warm the entire time. For the next 2 nights before my uncle returned, nothing else happened. And when he got home, he noticed the grandfather clock in the foyer had stopped. It needed to be wound again. The time that was frozen on the clock 3:30. That was the moment everything clicked. Every strange thing had happened while the clock was running, and it stopped when the clock did. They never wound the clock again, and from that point on, nothing else happened. For reasons I still can't understand, they never got rid of it. My aunt and uncle eventually divorced, and she keeps the clock in the hallway of her new apartment. 15 years later, it still just sits there, unwound, and nothing has happened since. They won't use the word ghost to describe what they saw. In fact, they don't even like talking about it at all. But when they do, their faces drain of color, their eyes gloss over, and the hairs on their arms stand straight up. As for me, there will never be a grandfather clock in my house. So this story takes place a long time ago on Halloween. I know that sounds stereotypical, but it's what happened. I was about 10 or 12 years old. I can't remember exactly. I was in my cousin's neighborhood and was hanging out with my aunt and a few of her neighbors, riding around on my cousin's bike. It was almost midnight, and most trick-or-treaters had gone home, and my cousin was inside watching horror movies. I decided to ride his bike down the middle of the road to get away from my aunt who was annoying me. What she was doing, I don't exactly remember. So, it's the middle of the night on Halloween in the suburbs, so I figured I didn't have any cars to worry about. I got about maybe 15 yards down the road, away from the adults, when this bright light obscured my vision. I figured it was a car with their brights on for some reason, so I turned my bike and prepared to get back on the sidewalk. But the light quickly faded. When I looked back at the road to check for the car, I saw this giant figure instead. It was about 20 yards down the road from me. I remember it being incredibly tall, probably as tall as a power pole. I remember it being taller than or as tall as the trees for sure. At the distance I was at, I couldn't make out any facial features. It was incredibly lanky looking and was of a pale complexion. I also remember it being kind of transparent to an extent. The best way I can describe it is that it looked kind of like a naked Slenderman, if you're familiar with that legend. I know that sounds like a really stereotypical description. That sounds like every other monster on the internet these days, but that really is the only way I can describe it. When I looked at it, I felt kind of perplexed. I wasn't even scared, just mainly confused. After a few seconds of not really understanding what I was looking at, this giant thing started slowly walking toward me. It moved really stiff and awkward, before making a sharp right on the road onto the sidewalk, and down a walking path that led to a small creek that cut through the suburbs. The path it went down was poorly lit, so I lost sight of it. Thoroughly weirded out, I decided to return to my aunt's house. I asked the adults hanging out in the front lawn if they had seen it, and somehow, they hadn't just seen the giant creature that appeared in a bright light just down the road. Not really thinking that they believed me, I just went inside. The rest of that night was normal. Nothing weird like that happened again. To this day, roughly a decade later, this is the only paranormal experience that I can't easily explain. I guess I could have just been really tired, but it definitely didn't feel that way. Can anyone explain this? This all happened within the last 2 or 3 hours. My mom and I have been trying to catch the ice cream truck all summer. There are a few bars they sell that you can't really get anywhere else around here, and every time we hear it, we're either too late or it never comes close enough. Tonight, we were sitting on the couch watching a show when we suddenly heard the ice cream truck outside. Not faint, loud. It was close. I jumped up and went to the front door. When I looked outside, the truck was directly in front of our house. At first, I started to say it was too late, but then I realized it wasn't driving away. It was stopping, and it didn't stop in an "oh, someone came outside" kind of way. It was more like it had already been slowing down to stop before I even opened the door. My mom told me to hurry out, just in case it left. It was a little strange. It was around 9 p.m., but we wanted ice cream. She came outside with me, and we ordered. The driver was quiet, almost uncomfortably so. When he did speak, he said he stopped because he heard voices. That didn't make any sense. No one else was outside. There was an open garage door a few houses down, but no one was there either. He found the flavor I asked for easily, but had trouble finding my mom's. "I just saw it," he said. "I just ate one." I figured he was new or nervous, so I didn't think much of it. We paid and went back inside, and that's when things got weird. As soon as we sat down, I noticed my ice cream bar was already open. I asked my mom if she'd opened it. She had been holding both of them, but she said no. She offered to switch with me, and that's when we noticed that hers was swollen, puffier than it should have been, like it had been blown up with air. Neither of us wanted to eat either one, and threw them both away. After a few minutes, the whole thing started to sink in. It was 9 p.m. The music hadn't slowly faded in. It had suddenly turned on. The truck had already been stopping before I opened the door. The driver was quiet. The ice cream was wrong. And after we went inside, he sped off, without stopping for anyone else. About 15 minutes later, I called my mom in from the garage. Our cats were trying to catch a bug that looked like a wasp or something. As she walked inside, she froze. She saw something through the kitchen window. She grabbed me and rushed me to the door. When she opened it, another car, not the ice cream truck, was parked out front with its lights on. The moment the door opened, it peeled out and sped away. I didn't get a good look, but my mom said it had been sitting there, pulled over, just watching. My dad came home shortly after, and we told him everything. He agrees it's strange, but that's about it. Sure, both incidents could be innocent, just coincidences, but together, in that span of time, it's weird. My mom wants me to sleep in the living room tonight, just in case something happens. I kind of agree. I'm nervous as hell. To the creepy people we saw tonight, let's not meet again. Ever. This is a story my father has told me more times than I can count. Even now, decades later, he still struggles to finish it. My dad was a logger, specifically a tree saw operator. He ran one of those massive machines designed to cut down enormous trees and then cut them into precise lengths. It's dangerous, grueling work, and it often means being completely alone in the deep forest for hours at a time. The way his crew worked was simple. My dad would be dropped off at a designated site and paid by how much timber he cut, not by how long it took. So, he pushed himself hard. 16 to 20-hour days weren't unusual. Once he finished, the rest of the crew would come in to clean up the trees and haul them up to the mill. About half the time, my dad worked alone. The other half, he worked along another tree saw operator named Rennie. When they were on the same job site, they communicated using handheld radios. That detail matters. About 10 days into a new job, high up on a mountain, things started to feel off. At first, it was the radios. No matter what channel they switched to, they kept hearing strange chatter. Garbled voices, overlapping and distorted. It wasn't static. It sounded like people talking, but the quality was so poor that no actual words could be made out, and the voices followed them across every channel they tried. As the days went on and they worked farther up the mountain, the voices slowly became clearer. Clear enough that both men realized something was wrong. They started finding signs that people had been there. Containers, trash, evidence of recent activity. This was deeply unsettling because this site was extremely remote, over a 2.5-hour drive up a mountain. They'd spent a full 3 weeks just clearing the road enough for trucks and equipment to reach the area. No one should have been there. They also realized something else. They weren't scheduled to leave for another week. They only went down the mountain occasionally to refuel the machines, grab supplies, and sleep in campers parked near the site. One day, Rennie found a tent. He radioed my dad and asked him to come over. Inside the tent was a single sleeping bag and a duffel bag. When they opened it, what they found made their blood run cold. Multiple pairs of children's underwear, rope, duct tape, crude sketches depicting children being abused, and photographs of children who appeared unaware they were being watched. In the tent, there was also food, canned goods, and an apple. The apple wasn't moldy, which meant whoever had been there recently. Now, they knew they weren't just alone on the mountain. They were sharing it with someone dangerous. Rennie wanted to leave immediately, but my dad, stubborn, driven, and determined to finish what he started, insisted they finish the job and get out as fast as possible. They agreed on one thing. They would no longer talk over the radios unless it was an emergency. Instead, they just listened. By then, they were close enough to full conversations. 2 men talking casually about gathering water and collecting wood for a fire. Normal conversation. Except for the fact that these men absolutely did not belong there. One evening, near the end of the workday, my dad heard them talking about collecting brush for a fire. This time, he keyed the radio and spoke. "Who are you?" he asked. "And what are you doing here?" The conversation stopped instantly. The radio went dead. That night, Rennie shook my dad awake. Someone was outside the camper. The first thing my dad heard was soft, deliberate shuffling. Footsteps just beyond the door. He reached for his gun, fumbling in the dark, and realized in a sudden wave of panic that it wasn't loaded, and he had no idea where the ammunition was. Rennie was unarmed. Calling the police was impossible. They were hours away from civilization. Then, the doorknob jiggled. The camper door swung open. The camper sat high off the ground. There was no ladder and no step stool. Whoever had opened the door had jumped to reach it. The door stayed open. No one moved. Then came the scratching, right outside the doorway. It went on for 4 minutes. Finally, my dad nodded to Rennie. My dad stood up quietly and stepped toward the door. The moment he reached it, a blinding pain tore across his face, from his right eye to his left cheek. He'd been slashed. He fell out of the camper, hitting the ground hard. A man with a knife was on top of him. Another man stood behind him, kicking him repeatedly in the head. Rennie leapt out of the camper and managed to knock the attacker off my dad. In the chaos, my dad scrambled to his feet and saw the second man, the one without the knife, sprinting into the darkness. The man with the knife followed, and they were gone. My dad and Rennie didn't wait. They got into the truck and drove straight to the nearest hospital. My dad's face required treatment, and the incident was reported to the police. They both quit their jobs immediately. 2 weeks later, as the remaining logging crew finished the site, one of the workers was found, gagged, bound, murdered, and dumped into a ditch. No one has ever been arrested. My dad can barely see out of his right eye. His pupil is permanently disfigured, elongated like a cat's eye. He suffers from severe PTSD and hasn't slept through the night since. And every time he tells this story, he ends it the same way. If we had stayed one more night, we wouldn't have made it off that mountain. Before I tell this story, there's one detail that I want to make clear. Every single night, without exception, I close my closet doors before I go to sleep. They're sliding panel doors, covering a large closet stuffed with clothes and shoeboxes. I don't know when the habit started, but it's something that I always do. That detail is important. Last night, I had a nightmare that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. I don't remember how it began, only the middle and the end. In the dream, there was a rule. I had to be in bed before 5:30 p.m. If I wasn't, something would attack me. I never saw the creature clearly at first. I just knew that it existed, and I knew it wanted me. The first night went well. I somehow managed to trap the thing in another room. The door was sealed completely, no cracks, and no way for it to get out. Or so I thought. On the second night, I lost track of time. I was in the kitchen eating when I glanced at the oven clock and saw it. 5:30. Panic hit me all at once. But for some reason, because dreams, instead of going straight to bed, I walked to the bathroom to grab my toothbrush. And that's when I noticed it. The door to the room where I had locked the creature was open, just a few inches. And from the darkness inside, something was reaching out. A long, fleshy hand curled around the doorknob. It looked wrong. The fingers were too long, bent in a round, almost rubbery way, like a claw that couldn't quite decide what shape it wanted to be. For reasons I still can't explain, I walked toward it. I opened the door, thinking I could slam it shut on the hand. Instead, the hand began to pull the rest of itself out. And that's when I woke up. I sat straight up in my bed, my heart pounding. My room was dark and quiet. I adjusted my fan, trying to calm myself, and laid back down. A few minutes later, I heard something that froze my blood. The slow, unmistakable creak of my ladder. You see, my bed is an IKEA bunk bed, but without the bottom bunk. It's like a bed on stilts, with open space underneath, and a ladder leading up to where I sleep. Something was climbing it. Then I saw it. I don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. Not just fear, but a kind of overwhelming dread that made my whole body feel weak and heavy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Instead, I tried to pray. At first, I told myself it had to be sleep paralysis. I've gotten it a few times. When it happens, I hear a loud buzzing or ringing, and the room feels like it's shaking. But this wasn't like that. There was no buzzing, no ringing, and I could move. And then it reached for me. The arms stretched unnaturally, like they were made of elastic, and its hands went straight for my neck. I threw my arms up to protect myself, and it grabbed my wrists, hard. I could feel the pressure as it tried to drag me off the bed. I thrashed with everything I had. Somehow, I broke free. I pulled my blankets over my head and curled into myself, shaking, wondering what I could possibly have done to deserve this.
I heard movement on the ladder again, this time going down, but I didn't dare look. I wish I could say I fell asleep after that. I didn't. I stayed under those blankets all night. Every sound made my heart jump. After what felt like forever, I finally worked up the courage to peek out. The room was empty. An hour later, sunlight crept in through my window. The sun was rising, but the feeling didn't leave. I still felt watched. I told myself it was just a nightmare, a night terror, nothing more. But that illusion shattered when I went to get breakfast. My closet doors were open, both of them, and my wrists were red, sore, and looked like something had been gripping them. I don't know what happened that night. If it was just a dream, then why were my doors open? And why did I have marks on my wrists?
Not my story, but my dad's from the 80s. He and his friends were on their motorcycles riding trails. This is in the mountains of North Carolina. They ventured up an old logging road that had not seen any traffic by other trail riders based on the looks of it. They came into a clearing to see women's lingerie hanging in the trees. Not like a few pieces, but hundreds. They noped out of there quick, fast, and in a hurry, before the nutjob who hung it up returned. I've always believed in aliens, despite never encountering any myself. Until one night in July. These strange occurrences happened about 2 or 3 years ago, in the southeast region of New Hampshire. I still cannot explain what I saw, and neither can my mother. My mother and I got off of work, and were driving down this back road. We were about 5 to 7 minutes away from our house. I'm driving. We're approaching a hill that leads up to a long narrow road through the woods. I see a bright light hovering about 20 feet above the house, perched on top of the hill. My mother notices it too. I turn off the radio and roll down the windows. There was no noise. I drive up the hill and notice 2 cars stopped off on the side, looking up at the sky. I pass them and take a glimpse through the trees. I see a large square-shaped metal object. There are circular lights shining from the bottom. My mom and I turned around in the first driveway we could find. It took maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. We went back and it was gone. I was freaked out, but excited to have a UFO story of my own. The excitement gradually wore off, the more frequently the sightings became. My friend and I were walking along the beach across from my family's restaurant. We saw a light hovering near the lighthouse. We assumed the light had stopped revolving since it wasn't moving. Suddenly, the light jolted forward and began flying around maniacally. It dove behind the houses along the beach and disappeared. At this point, I've had another person in my life experience separate events. I knew it wasn't just a figment of my mom and I's imagination. My mother and I saw it about once a week for the next month after that. The light would be hovering in the distance, completely silent, and would disappear once we were too close. We chose to ignore it. As long as the light kept its distance, we felt moderately safe. Then came the close encounter. My mom and I got off work around 8 and returned home with a trunk of groceries. Our condo was at the very end of a cul-de-sac, and at the other end, a tiny hill with a line of tall trees. As we're bringing the bags into the house, I notice a light off in the distance. The light starts getting closer and closer until it's above the tree line, which is about 100 feet, give or take, from where our car is, and it stops. My mom is frightened at this point. I tell her I'm done being afraid, and stand there waiting for the light to approach me. As I begin walking toward it, it zooms off to my left and disappears above the forest tree line. I was shaken. The light had stopped and seemed to be observing my mother and I until we took notice. Since that summer, We've never seen it again, except for one other time, but we chalked it up to a drone. We've tried to explain it away. A helicopter, but there was no noise. Plane, wouldn't be able to stop moving so randomly. Even a drone. Although, you still can't explain the uneasy silence, etc. We began to think it was trying to abduct us, or maybe it already had, and we had no memory of it. Has anyone else experienced a strange light in New Hampshire? I'm willing to accept any explanation at this point.
This happened last winter, during a pretty typical snowstorm here in New Jersey. At the time, I was 17 and living at home with my parents and my two brothers. Normally, shoveling the driveway and sidewalks was my brother's job, but that week, both of them and my mom had the flu. I was taking care of everyone, cooking, cleaning, and trying to keep the house running. My dad was stuck out of state on a business trip and couldn't get a flight home. So the snow fell, and the responsibility landed on me. In my town, if you don't clear your driveway and sidewalk, you can get hit with a pretty hefty fine. You're even required to dig out the fire hydrants. I'm about 5'5", barely 120 pounds, not exactly built for heavy snow. But I grabbed a shovel and went outside anyway. About 15 minutes in, I had the driveway cleared and one side of the sidewalk finished. I turned to head back and complete the other side when I noticed a man walking toward me. He was big, middle-aged, and carrying a shovel of his own. I know my neighbors. This guy wasn't one of them. As he got closer, I noticed a smile, wide, fixed, and unsettling. His teeth were deeply yellow. I said a quick hello out of politeness, hoping he'd just keep walking. He didn't.
"Some storm, huh?"
he said. I nodded and tried to step around him to get back to shoveling. As I passed, I realized he was leaning down slightly, angling himself so I'd have to look him in the eyes. I snapped, louder than I meant to. "Excuse me." He didn't move. Instead, he smiled wider.
"Sweetheart,"
he said.
"I can't stand seeing a young girl put to work like this. Let me help you out."
I told him I was fine. He asked again and again, 3 times. At that point, I turned away and started shoveling, my back to him, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. He hadn't moved. He was just standing there watching me. Finally, I yelled, "Can I help you?" He laughed.
"Can I help you?"
Trying to de-escalate, I changed my tone. "Sir, I'm almost done. I don't need help. Please just leave me alone so I can finish." Instead, he said,
"I charge $35 to shovel driveways. For what's left, I'll do it for 10.
I was broke. More importantly, I was scared. "No sale," I said. "Take care." I rounded the corner of the sidewalk to finish the last 20 feet, and when I looked up, he was still there, still smiling, still watching. That's when I went inside. I told my mom and my brothers that a creepy guy was outside staring at me. My oldest brother jumped up immediately, still sick, wearing just a t-shirt and sweatpants, and ran out the front door. But the man was gone. My brother searched the block, but didn't see him anywhere. He came back annoyed, questioning whether I was exaggerating. I swore I wasn't. I told him I didn't want to go back outside. Later that day, a neighbor finished the shoveling for us. My mom explained what happened, and he promised to keep an eye out. It's a small town. People notice strangers. No one recognized the description I gave. That night, I opened Facebook, and that's when I saw it. A 15-year-old girl from my town had been attacked earlier that day. The mugshot posted with the article showed that same man.
She had been outside shoveling with her father. He went inside briefly to use the bathroom and get a coffee. In those few moments, the man ran up, grabbed her, punched her repeatedly, and pulled a knife from his boot. Her father saw it from the window, and a neighbor rushed over. Together, they broke the man's arm and restrained him until the police arrived. The report said he was schizophrenic, off his medication, and wandering the neighborhood. Something about the girl had triggered him. He likely didn't even understand what he was doing. I still think about how close it was, how easily it could have been me. That girl survived because someone was watching, and because help came before it was too late. I didn't have that same protection, and that's the part that still keeps me awake at night. A couple years back, my boyfriend and I were driving in the country back roads of central Illinois. It was about 9 p.m., cold and rainy, mid-October. Large wooded areas all around. We were in mid-conversation when we both cut off at the same time, and we were overcome with dread. To the right of the road was a 6 or 7 foot tall, pale humanoid. Its arms were disproportionately long and thin. It didn't have any discernible facial features. It peered out from behind the trees and looked directly at us. We were both silent for about 30 seconds, and I finally said, did you see? And my boyfriend says, "Thank God you said something. I thought I was crazy." A few days later, our two friends were hanging out in their car at one of the local park areas, surrounded by woods and cornfields. The fields were recently harvested, so you could see all the way to the tree line. They said they saw something pale and incredibly thin and humanoid across the field. It ran kind of like a dog, and it disappeared into the woods within seconds. At first, I thought it might be something different because I was thinking what I saw was more humanoid. Then, I discovered that thousands of people have reported seeing humanoid, pale, naked, lanky things that move like dogs. There's apparently particularly a lot of sightings in Illinois, so that part adds up as well. Lots of reports from the 50s and 60s of pale humanoids as well. It really makes me wonder. Anyway, I'm now convinced that there's an undiscovered humanoid living in America. We haven't proved they exist because they're so fast and silent. And they also hide in abandoned buildings, caves, and mines. I have for sure died twice, possibly 4 times. Of the 2 I'm very confident in, the first one happened in about 1998, and the other in 2018 or so. In my first instance, my best friend and I were driving gravel back roads in the middle of the night, 40 miles between towns in rural South Dakota. I was, admittedly, going too fast, and we came over a small hill, and there was a T in the road where you could turn left or right, but straight forward was a driveway for a farmhouse. The driveway went for about half a block or so, and then transitioned into a cornfield. I remember saying, "Oh fuck," and slamming on the brake as we started flying through the cornfield. It was late summer, and the corn stalks were basically full grown. The sound, as my car plowed over the corn stalks and into the field, sounded like the most vicious hailstorm ever. The experience was completely overwhelming to the senses. The sights and sounds of flying headlong at high speeds into a fully grown, densely planted cornfield cannot be overstated. But this is where things get weird. The next thing I remember was sitting at a stop sign where we would turn onto the main highway in the area. It was nearly completely silent, with only the light hum of the engine creating any sound. This was at least several miles away from the field
that we had just flown into. My blinker was on to the left, and the car was just sitting still with my foot on the brake. The black of motion and dead silence was, for reasons unknown, absolutely overwhelming. I felt extremely disoriented and discombobulated, and was honestly not certain how I'd come to this point, and was even concerned that perhaps I had blacked out or something. I just wasn't certain how we had arrived to where we currently were. At this point, I didn't remember flying through that intersection or crashing through the cornfield. That memory was gone, either blocked or unremembered. I looked over at my friend and said, "Where are we?" He had a dumbfounded look on his face as well, and shrugged his shoulders, and after a moment said, "I think we go left." I actually got out of the car and found the North Star to make sure that we were turning in the correct direction onto the highway. I also surveyed the situation, grasping for some semblance of understanding. We were surprisingly close to the town I lived in at the time. In short order, we made it to my apartment and both crashed as it was about 4 in the morning, and we had had a very long day. I was dead sober for this entire experience, but I didn't feel right, and I knew something was amiss. We got up the next day, about mid-morning, and got back in my car to drive to my friend's town where he was attending college, which was going to be about a 5-hour drive. We needed gas, and I stopped at a station to fill up and get some other miscellaneous supplies. The car I was driving at the time was old enough to be using a bit of oil, so I almost always checked the oil when I stopped. Again, at this moment, the memories of the cornfield and all that were completely gone. I popped the hood and went around to the front of the car to get to the engine. I lifted the hood and glanced down. I've never been so absolutely baffled and immediately enlightened at the same time. A light breeze would have knocked me over. The engine compartment was almost completely chock full of corn stalks. My knees went weak, and I became very dizzy. Once again, I very loudly and firmly proclaimed, "What the fuck?" and called to my friend so he'd come around to the front of the car. The very instant I saw the corn stalks in the engine compartment, the entire accident flashed back to me. I don't remember the point of death, but I remember all the other details, including being very confused at the stop sign by the highway and the brutal contrast between flying through the field and sitting still at the stop sign. My friend says to me, "Do you remember?" I simply said, "Yeah." We talked it over multiple times during our long drive, and we had the exact same memories. His memory also returned to him the second that he saw the corn in the car. A couple of months later, I tried to drive the same back roads that we had been driving to find that intersection and that farmhouse and the driveway and cornfield. There were a couple of very unique specific details to the location where the accident happened that should have made it very easy to recognize and find. But I was never able to locate a spot like this on any of the roads anywhere around where we were driving. Microsoft had also just released their satellite imagery, and I scoured everywhere between those two cities, and I've never been able to find the location where we had our accident. I honestly don't think it exists on this timeline. And the other time, I was out in the middle of the night again, in a very rural area during a thunderstorm to take lightning photos. I'm pretty sure that I saw the lightning bolt that killed me prior to my timeline jump. I remember sitting in the car and finishing my styrofoam cup of gas station coffee and hopping out of the car to smoke a cigarette. Most of the lightning was several miles to the west, and it wasn't even actually raining where I parked. I wasn't remotely worried at lightning safety at this point. Now, the very large power lines that take electricity to the town I was living in were right along this road. I've been pretty close to a couple of lightning strikes. I'm no stranger. I remember getting that very powerful static feeling, and the hair on my head and my arms starting to stand up. I knew it was coming. I started to reach for the door handle, and before I knew it, I remember a profoundly huge snap sound and a blinding white light. The next thing I remember was sitting in my parked car with my nearly full cup of coffee. I remember thinking that I wanted to smoke a cigarette, so I chugged the lukewarm coffee and started to get out of the car. The second my feet hit the ground, I felt the most massive wave of deja vu that I've ever experienced, including the cornfield. I nervously glanced up beside the road to look at the power lines, but the spot I stopped previously was still about a mile down the road. I glanced in that direction to about where I thought the spot was that I had previously been in, and just as I looked in that location, a lightning struck the power line in multiple massive flashes, and I even saw the lightning bolt jump down to the ground under the power line. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I witnessed the very lightning bolt that killed me.
This is something I've been needing to get off my chest for a while, and I'm not sure where else to tell it. A few years back, after my junior year of high school, I was working a summer job, making enough money where I could support myself for a few days if needed. At the time, my parents decided they wanted to take a trip to the beach for their anniversary, leaving me home by myself for a week, which was fine by me. The time came and they left, leaving me and my dog to fend for ourselves. I should add, it wasn't uncommon to hear footsteps or things moving on their own, as I've lived next to a graveyard all my life, and I just took it as that's how things were. About 3 days had passed since they had left, and I had just gotten off of work, and the sun was starting to set by the time I got home, and it was pretty much dark outside. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into the driveway was that I could see light through the window of my living room, which I thought was odd. But when I walked into my home, I realized every single light in my house had been turned on. I didn't think much of it. I looked through the house and turned them all off, leaving only my living room and kitchen light on. And that was when I noticed that my dog wasn't laying in his bed as he usually was. Instead, I found him underneath the cabinet in my bathroom, shaking to the point that I thought he was sick. But he calmed down and came out when he saw me. And like I said, a little activity in the house was not uncommon. So, I just thought it was a strange occurrence and shrugged it off. At this point, it's really dark out, and it started pouring down rain. I had to go pick up dinner from somewhere, so I went and got Sonic, and when I headed back, I nearly forgot about what had happened earlier. But sure enough, when I pulled back into the driveway, all the lights were on again. But this time, when I stepped foot into the house, I was hit by this overwhelming stench. A smell so foul and pungent, it made my eyes water immediately. And that should have been my telltale sign to get out of there as soon as I could. But I didn't. I sat my food on the counter by the door and went to find my dog, who was lying in the corner of the room, seemingly stressed to the point that he had threw up on the floor. I quickly got him on his chain and out of the house, and got to cleaning up the mess. At this point, the smell had only gotten worse, and I had this terrible feeling of fear that I can't describe. I finished cleaning the mess up and realized that I should probably turn the lights off, so I started in the bathroom, into my father's room and then my room. Nothing eventful had happened, but when I got to my mom's room, I had this feeling like something was staring at me. I looked around and looked out of the windows, but there was nothing there. So, I turned around to leave the room, and that's when I saw it. This awful, decayed, or burnt-looking thing was standing right where I'd come from, in the middle of the hallway, outside my mom's room. I froze in fear and just stared directly back at him. Its eyes were almost human, but way too sunken back, and I could see what looked like dark, charred skin hanging from its face. I have no idea how long we stared at each other, but suddenly, I turned around and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. But when I turned back, the thing was gone, and the lights in the living room had turned back on. I remember just sitting in the floor in tears, just staring at the spot where the thing had stood. I must have sat there for about 10 minutes, and before sprinting out of the house, grabbing my dog, and staying in my truck the entire night. By the time we went back in, the sun had come back up, and things seemed like normal. I never mentioned this to anyone, and probably wouldn't have, but I saw it again yesterday. From everything I've researched, this sounds demonic, and the activity in the house has increasingly picked up since that first sighting. If you're reading this and have some sort of knowledge about the paranormal or demonic, please let me know what this sounds like to you.
Last year, after a blissful first year living in a new apartment, all on my own for the first time, a man moved in next door that I'll never forget. The layout of the apartment is crucial to understanding this incident. The most important part is that my balcony and his balcony are only partially separated by a wall. There is a solid 2-foot gap in which you can easily walk from one to the other. For context, I previously had a very lovely woman living next door for the entire first year I lived there, who never crossed this balcony threshold without being explicitly invited. I only throw this in there so you can understand I wasn't previously concerned about someone infiltrating my space. The first time I met this new neighbor, he was unloading groceries from his massive truck into the assigned parking spot next to mine. As I was driving up, he and a girl I assumed to be his girlfriend were unloading boxes from Costco. I noticed them speaking, and as soon as I was out of the car, they went silent. I nodded to them, proceeded to the elevator, and the guy ran up behind me, threw some boxes down, and begged me to wait. No problem, I'm a good neighbor. While in the elevator, the girlfriend refused to make eye contact or speak to me. A little weird, but I just thought that she was shy. But he quickly introduced himself and was extremely chatty. In the 45 seconds it takes to get to the floor where our apartments were, he asked me how I liked the place, where I was from, and where I worked. Looking back, his enthusiasm was a little strange, but I chalked it up to him being excited to be in a new place. For the sake of the rest of this story, let's call him Sam. Sam was maybe 33, 6 foot tall, with a slim muscular build, and had hair buzzed extremely short, as if to mask his balding. Pretty average looking dude by all accounts. The first few weeks, we ran into each other often, and he always made small talk, and always refers to me as Miss. I assume it's because he forgot my name, but wanted to be polite. I almost never see his girlfriend after the first night, but occasionally, I can hear him talking to a woman in his apartment, as the walls are reasonably thin. One night, about 3 months after Sam moved in, my boyfriend is spending the night, and we were watching movies on the couch. It's maybe 11:30 p.m. The back of my couch is against the wall I share with Sam, and we hear some banging noises. My first thought is that him and his girlfriend must be getting it on. My boyfriend and I laugh, and turn the volume up a bit to drown them out. Then, in addition to the banging, the neighbors begin screaming. We can hear objects being thrown and glass shattering. The words are muffled, but there is distinctively anger and crying going on. My boyfriend, the gem that he is, steps onto the semi-shared balcony and in his loudest voice yells over, without crossing onto Sam's balcony, "Everything okay in there?" The girl opens the sliding glass door on Sam's side a minute or two later and says, "Sorry about that." So, we leave it alone. I'm concerned, but we have no idea what actually happened and decide to go to bed. Big mistake, I know. I wake up around 3 a.m. to more screaming, but my boyfriend refuses to wake up, and I'm not about to take my 5-foot self to break up whatever is going on at 3 a.m. I considered calling the police, but was so drowsy I convinced myself I dreamed it. I deeply regret that decision. The next morning, I woke up to some terrible personal news, an entirely unrelated death of a friend, and pretty much put the events of that night on the back burner. I didn't forget, but it also wasn't on my mind. Fast forward about 2 weeks, and I'm outside reading a book in a robe, sports bra, and shorts. I'm in a chair that faces away from Sam's apartment, so I can't see his side from where I am. I'm deep in my book when suddenly, I get tapped on the shoulder. Sam is standing behind me and asks if we can talk for a second. This man has already crossed an, albeit invisible, line by coming on my side of the balcony, but I also can't get to my door without physically moving him aside, so I ask him what's going on. He told me it was his birthday, and he asked if I knew where to get weed because, quote, "I seem like a girl who knows how to have a good time." As we live in a state where weed is legal, I told him that I'm sure Google would provide the best dispensary in the area, but I personally didn't have any. He proceeds to tell me how drunk he got last night, and at this point, I'm itching for an exit. As I start to move as if to signal I'm done talking, he reaches out for my shoulder and tells me that he hit and scratched my car last night because he was driving very, very wasted. He says all of this with a smile on his face, almost laughing. I'm surprised, but mostly just want to get away from him because my creep senses are starting to tingle, and I don't want to blow up at him for hitting my car. He says he'll send me his insurance info if I give him my number, and thankfully, I knew that would be a bad call. I make a bad nervous joke about knowing where he lived and said if the damage was bad enough, I would knock on his door to get his insurance. He counters by saying he'll leave a note with his info on my door. He retreats from my balcony while also saying he'd prefer to just pay me cash and not involve insurance. I give it an hour or so and then head down to assess the damage. I did this because I didn't want to walk down at the same time as him or risk having him follow me. Sure enough, there are 2 new long scratches on the driver's door. They're not deep, just kind of superficial, or worthy of a call to insurance immediately. I really just didn't want to get involved with him in any way, so I decided I could deal with the scratches, but this little event has kind of shaken me. At this point, I knew something was off with him. Nothing unusual happens as far as I'm aware this night. The next day is a Saturday, and as I had to work the next day, I'm home alone, watching some action-y movie, and it's around 11 p.m. I'm on the sofa with my cat curled up on me, and the movie is relatively loud, so it takes me a little while to register this banging noise coming from the hallway of my apartment building. I honestly only noticed because my cat had woken up and got all puffed up and freaked out. I turn down the volume of the film, and suddenly the banging is getting louder and louder. And just as I stand up, I hear the 5 words no one wants to hear coming from their door.
"Open up, it's the police."
My stomach dropped to the floor. I had lied to Sam the day before. I totally had weed. And I had smoked a joint outside on the balcony, the part furthest away from Sam's, maybe 20 minutes before. I'm totally panicked, high as a kite, and trying to control my breathing so I don't immediately come off as suspicious before I answer the door. I remember checking the peephole to see a close-up of a cop's face, and then opening the door and coming face to face with 6 officers, all with guns drawn. I'm about half a second away from completely pissing my pants in fear, still convinced I'm somehow in trouble for smoking a joint. The officer who seems to be in charge can sense instantly the level of my panic, and he says, "Ma'am, you're not in trouble. "We need to speak with you about your neighbor. Can we come in?" At this point, I'm reeling and my whole being is tense. I let the cops in, but my heart hasn't moved from my throat. The policeman in charge asked me about my interactions with Sam. I tell them I barely know him, that he just lives next to me and only moved in a few months ago. I ask why they needed to be in my apartment. I'm scared, but also I don't typically get along with cops, and I have the right to know why 6 of them practically waved their guns in my face. The lead officer proceeds to tell me that Sam is a bad guy. He apparently beat his girlfriend so badly the night prior that she was now in the ICU for her injuries. They also told me Sam had a gun and had barricaded himself in the apartment next to mine. They said they had spoken to my building manager and knew my place had access to his balcony and they needed to use it. Then they asked me to go into my bedroom and lock the door and turn the lights off. The next 30 to 45 minutes were absolute hell. In my panic, I had left my cell phone on my kitchen counter and had to sit in my room just listening to the commotion. No shots were ever fired, but there was a lot of yelling and what sounded like things being thrown. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, the main officer knocked on my door and told me that Sam had been arrested and thanked me for letting them use my apartment. They asked me questions for maybe 15 more minutes and left. I wish this is where the story ended, but there's a bit more. In the days following Sam's arrest, I became even more panicked about him coming back to the apartment building, worried about retaliation. I hadn't said anything to the police to technically incriminate him. I had proof of nothing except his word that he was the one who scratched my car, but I did tell them about the night my boyfriend and I heard them fight. About 5 days later, Sam reappeared at the building as I was coming home from work one evening. He tried to approach me, but the elevator shut just as he was running to catch it. My whole body got tense, like the feeling when you've come this close to getting in a car accident, but narrowly avoid it. I stayed off my balcony entirely from this point and always kept the curtains closed. We didn't speak or really see each other at all for another few weeks, and then had our final interaction. Sam stopped me in the parking lot one night, running after me as I was about to get on the elevator. He begged me to tell him why I let the cops in that night. I told him the honest truth, that I was stoned, I didn't know what to do, and had a bad history with cops. This is all true, and again, I was concerned about him trying to retaliate. He then got pretty upset and kept trying to repeat the question, obviously wanting a different answer. When I couldn't give him one, he then offered me $3,000 to testify as a character witness on his behalf, because I knew him and knew how he really treated women. I was speechless and very freaked out. He told me his hearing was the next Thursday morning and he asked if I could show up. I was like a deer frozen in headlights for a moment and then somehow got the hell out of there after mumbling a string of words that were most likely incoherent. The Wednesday night before this trial, I came home from work and my cat was acting kind of weird, like something had just spooked her and her tail was puffed out. I kind of shook it off, but I noticed through the curtains there was something taped to the outside of my sliding glass door. Apparently, Sam had left a post-it with his phone number and name, and underneath had written, "I am counting on you." Needless to say, I never showed up. I took a photo of the post-it, grabbed my cat, locked all my doors, and stayed at my mom's house for about 5 days after that happened. I did phone the police to let them know he'd been on my balcony again, but they never followed up with anything. Eventually, my boyfriend came, and we went back to my place together. Everything was as it should have been. I never saw Sam again, but a few weeks later, a lady I'd never seen before was cleaning out his apartment. Maybe a month after that, new people moved in, and things have been normal ever since. I tried calling the police and the county jail to see if he was in lockup again, but no one was able to release information to me. I'm hoping that means he's there, if he did what the police said he did. So, Sam, I'm not really sure what happened, but my biggest regret is not calling the police when I felt like I should have in my gut. Let's never meet again.
I'm currently 28, and I've been a law enforcement officer for 8 years in the southwest part of the US. My story is one of hundreds, but I selected it to be told because I still think it was my personal scariest moment. I was 24 at the time. I had dealt with countless dead people, murders, gruesome fatal wrecks, and saved a man from bleeding to death from knife wounds, pulled an elderly lady from her rolled over burning vehicle, tossed a bastard around after he was attempting to knife his girlfriend in their apartment, and ended up keeping her from dying. I had even faced psychopaths directly, staring into their soulless eyes, and heard them tell me ways they would hope to kill me and enjoy it. I talked a man with a gun in hand out of being stupid and pointing it at me or someone nearby, and he gave up and dropped it into a bush. I fought off pit bull dogs from biting at my legs while trying to detain their owner, who was actively throwing scalding hot water on his girlfriend. Such is life as a cop. But this day remains in the bowels of my soul. It was a Monday night, my Friday of a 4-day work week. Slow, as most Mondays during school times are. I'm parked with my driver's door next to my partner's driver's door. It's cold, and we're chatting it up about upcoming video games as our breath leaves trails of humidity between our cars. And then we hear it. The call that changed the way I think of houses forever. The dispatch calls for me and my partner, who belong to the sector where the address is. It comes in as a domestic violence, where the male forced the front of a gun into his wife's mouth and has now turned the gun on himself, making threats of suicide by cop. To clarify, no police officer ever thinks happily on the fact that someday they may have to kill someone. This is not our happiest moment, ever. We make cruel and unusual jokes, and sometimes in this nature, but that's a socio-defense mechanism to prepare us for those days. We get to the block and turn off our headlights long before we see the house. It's huge. A mansion of castle-like proportions. It seemed bigger in the darkness in which we arrived. We approach on foot silently and hear a woman screaming. We run to the front door, and out she comes, naked and bloody. She had a gunshot wound to her shoulder that she held a t-shirt to. Her words were, "He's got the gun to my daughter's head." My partner asked for more officers on scene and medical to stand by blocks away. Our sergeant was coming too, but we couldn't wait. Not after hearing that. The insides of this castle were the darkest I have ever known. My whole body was cold, but my mind was hot, and I could just sense pure evil. To anyone who doesn't know what this is like, I can never explain it in enough detail. Pure evil, you can feel inside your soul. It's like walking in a fog all of a sudden, where life and happiness are far away on the outside world and not known, where the only colors are black, gray, and red. We approached the door with our firearms at the ready. I had my M4 rifle as this was involving a gun. The upper hand really helps in these situations, but this time, it was irrelevant to the horrors inside this home. We ran inside and were confronted by a huge entrance area, of which we quickly took to both sides, waiting to identify this man's location. Then we heard them. Boom, boom, boom. Gunshots from somewhere inside the dark house. Upstairs, up the winding stairs with open banisters. We ran up those stairs as fast as we could. Then we heard the girl screaming, as if her insides were being forced outward by bare hands. We started to run to that door as fast as we could, and right before the door, we heard more gunshots. We saw flashes from inside the room. My worst nightmare was happening. I quickly realized I could still hear the little girl. We ran inside to a bloody disaster. He was dead, and the little girl was tied up, hogtie style. Blood was splattered all around the room. There were black candles and sacrificial things in the room. Thank God, the girl was unhurt. The guy had shot himself multiple times, 3 in the stomach, 3 in his chest. and I'd assumed 3 in the face, but the second was instantly fatal. I have no idea what was happening. I have no idea why the house was so dark, but the poor little naked girl was okay, and that's all I gave a damn about. She was later placed into state custody as a 2-year-old. Her mother, having satanic ritual tattoos, later admitted that they planned on killing the girl, who had no documentation for her birth.
When I was younger, around 8 years old, I was with my daycare at a local park. We had to stay in a field that was lined by the park's forest, and our options were to play soccer or to walk laps. I chose to walk laps. While I was walking, I heard a woman say hello, and I looked over. There was a small, old woman, like a grandma, just off the trail. She was looking right at me, and I just remember thinking she had really cool eyes, and it made me stop walking. She seemed really kind, and growing up in my community, my mom always told me to find a grandma if I was scared, so I said hi back. She held her hands out, and she had the biggest orange butterfly spread across both of her hands. I assumed it was dead because it wasn't moving at all. She said, "I got this. It's for you. Here, you can have it," and tried to bring it forward to give it to me. I was really scared of bugs as a kid, so I told her I didn't want to touch it, but that it was really pretty. She kept insisting, and I started to feel really nervous about the whole thing. I decided to just say sorry and run away and join the soccer game. On the walk back, I told the other kids about the grandma I saw and how scary she was. I asked other kids who were walking if they'd seen her too. They all said no, and that they didn't know what I was talking about, but that they did hear me talking, but they didn't see who I was talking to. I told the daycare people, and they said that we don't have those kind of butterflies around here, and that I was just imagining things. But I definitely wasn't imagining her, or what happened. I've thought a lot about this old woman since then, and how menacing she seemed, but how harmless she looked. Maybe she was just a weird old lady and that no one else saw, but it just felt different. Thanks for listening.
I was looking in the mirror, and I saw my reflection just move on its own. Just a little bit, even though I hadn't moved at all. We just stared at each other, and it was like I was staring at another person. Like someone else with fears and thoughts and goals and stuff that was different than mine. And then it tried to talk to me. I could hear it, and I ran away. I have turned all my mirrors around because, for some reason, I feel like it wants to hurt me, and I think that might help prevent it from getting out. Maybe I need to break all the mirrors. I don't really want to do that though. I've seen my reflection be weird in the past. Sometimes I'll look in it, and it slowly starts to change into something weird and inhuman. I can't help but think, what if I'm the reflection? I don't know how to deal with this. I have a hard time sleeping now. I know that this is not supposed to happen, but I can't deny how I feel. I hate when experiences conflict with what people say is possible. It's not supposed to be a thing, but it clearly is because it's happening. I just don't know what to believe.
Before going into the story, I regretfully did not keep the photo, but I wish I did. I promise that this is a real event from my childhood, and it has stuck with me for probably 15 years. This isn't some creepypasta or anything, just a recollection of what happened, so bear with me. When I was a young kid, a friend and I were camping in his backyard. His family recently had a yard sale and were throwing a box of books away that they didn't sell, so we were going through them. We were talking and flipping through the books, and then my friend grows silent and is just staring at the book that he had. I asked him what's up, and he said something along the lines of, "You don't even want to see," or something like that. Well, of course, after that I certainly did. What he handed me was a photo that was inside of the book. Not part of the book. This was an actual photo that someone had taken and put in the book. The photo looked very old. Looking back, it seemed like one of those pioneer photos, or at least from the late 1800s or early 1900s. It had a woman in it facing the camera. She was in a field with a tree line behind her. She had an elongated face, and her mouth was agape. When I say elongated, I mean unnaturally so, as if she was disfigured. She was holding her arms up, but they bent at the elbow forward, nearly 90 degrees, with her hand open pointed toward the ground. She was wearing a black dress, not like the generic pioneer style dress. This was just all black and looked more like a gown. I believe she had longer, scraggly hair. So being a kid, I freaked out and threw it in the fire that we had going. About an hour later, we put out the fire and went inside. The next day, we woke up to clean up our mess in the backyard, and the photo was still intact, burnt, but you could mostly see what was on it. My only explanation is maybe it landed on the edge of the fire pit, where the fire hadn't reached and got mixed in with the ashes when we put it out. Even more freaked out, the photo was ripped up and thrown into the ashes, and we never really talked about it after that. I've tried to find something similar to this photo online, sporadically, and I can't. I was too young to really analyze it, so looking back, I don't know if it was some photo for a horror or art project, but at the time, it was pretty terrifying. I never thought I'd share this event with anyone, at the risk of sounding illogical, but I thought this may be the best platform to do it. I acknowledge that I was quite young when this occurred, so I will only share what I remember. But I know what I saw. I'm 28. As a child, I was in the same multi-grade classroom for grades 1 through 3, so I had the same teacher for those 3 years. Every year, on March 1st, my teacher would explain that each day until St. Patrick's Day, her mischievous friend, Patty the Leprechaun, would visit our classroom to cause mayhem and play innocent tricks on my classmates and I. Some examples would include coming into the classroom in the morning and our shoes would be tied together at the laces, or we'd return from recess or music and the classroom would be a mess, accompanied by a note from Patty on the whiteboard. In the back of my mind, I wondered if it was our teacher doing this, but it was still delightfully fun, and I look forward to this every year nonetheless. My perception of these events changed one day in the 2nd or 3rd grade, somewhere between March 1st and 17th. We were in class when suddenly the lights turned off and the computer shut down. Naturally, I turned around to see if someone had flicked the lights off, but no one was standing at the switch, not even near it. The next thing I remember is someone knocking at our classroom door. A student opened it, but there was no one there, and reportedly no one in the hall. Our class was giddy with excitement, as we wondered if Patty was responsible for this. I acknowledge these events are fairly explainable, but alongside the classroom door, there was a window that was as tall as the door, but only about a foot wide. I was gazing at this window, curious to see if the mysterious knocker would return. I was just feet away from the door. Suddenly, I saw a small green man flash across the window. The best way I can describe it is a small, a hazy side profile of a small man, about a foot tall, with a brown beard and a green suit. He was in a stance as though he was running, although he was frozen in that position as he flashed across the window. In a split second, it was gone. The figure looked apparition-like and didn't appear to have the tangibility of a physical object. It didn't look like a piece of paper being pulled across the window. I realized that it's totally possible that another staff at the school was in on it and somehow did this. I've pondered the possible ways that this could have been accomplished, and I can't seem to come up with an explanation. And I know I didn't just imagine it, because a moment after I saw it, another girl in my class exclaimed, "I just saw something run past the window." 20 plus years later, I know what I saw, but I still don't understand it. I'm left wondering, were my little 7-year-old eyes deceived by a simple trick? Or did my elementary school teacher have some Miss Frizzle-esque magic about her and somehow summon a magical creature to mystify us?
This happened back when I was in the 10th grade. One day, after rugby practice, I came home exhausted and plopped myself down on my bed. It was almost immediately as I hit the pillow. My cousin, who was very much alive, was next to me, and we were in deep conversation. It all happened very normal, until she asked me, "Do you promise?" and held out her pinky, to which I immediately stuck out mine and wrapped it around hers. As soon as our pinkies tied, I couldn't move and the energy changed. I was looking up at the ceiling with my pinky wrapped to something else. This thing began to say things like,
"You are my wife forever. We are together always,"
etc. Still frozen and unable to move, I was absolutely freaking the fuck out. It then started to talk about temptation and telling me I was tempted while trying to open my legs. I used all my strength against this thing to seal my legs shut, and finally, I woke up drenched in sweat. This was the first incident. I ran downstairs to my mom and our roommate, who was more like my aunt, and told them what happened and how scared I was. I kept saying how it didn't feel like a dream or nightmare. It felt very real, and it only lasted 10 minutes in real time, but it felt like forever. Both of them thought it was very disturbing, but all they could do was tell me that, luckily, it wasn't real, and to take a hot shower, have a tea, and watch a funny movie with them afterwards. The following evening, my mom had gone to her friend's house and was planning to stay the night, so I stayed in her bedroom because she had air conditioning and I felt safer. I was sleepy but awake and was flicking through the channels to watch. So I'm pressing the channel button, and boom, the atmosphere changed. I began to feel like I weighed a ton. I couldn't lift up my arm and hold the TV remote. I sunk completely under the covers where I was, what felt like a vacuum sealed under. I couldn't breathe or move to break free. I managed to swing myself off the bed. I felt drunk and could barely keep my body up. It felt like gravity was turned on to the highest notch. I managed to push myself into my aunt's room and plopped half my body onto her bed. I asked her to please help me. She turned over and calmly said, "Sweetie, I can't help you." I woke up gasping for air and crying. I turned the TV volume all the way up and grabbed the home phone, which was next to the bed, and called my mom and begged her to come home, even though it was the middle of the night and she was about an hour away. I knew it was that thing tormenting me. She came home, I told her what happened, and she slept with me that night. I didn't sleep a wink. A few days later, I came home from school exhausted, not because of rugby, but because I hadn't been sleeping. I would doze off and jump back awake. I would stay up all night
blasting music in my earbuds to prevent me from falling into that realm again. But this time, I was so tired I had to take a nap. I laid on my bed and let myself fall asleep. Seconds later, I'm looking at myself lying on my bed. There's this tall, staticky black shadow with a pointy chin standing over me, speaking in a different language. Yet, I understood it. I couldn't go back to my body. I couldn't yell. All I could do was watch this being tower over my body that I wasn't in. I woke up and began to sob and ran to my aunt downstairs and begged her to help me. It was too much. My aunt was Catholic and had a bottle of holy water in her room. She said that we have to salt and spray the whole house and every corner with it, and that I will have to tell this thing to leave. I agreed, and we did it. I felt scared and odd about yelling out loud repeatedly to leave this house and to leave me alone. But it seemed to work. For weeks, nothing had happened. I couldn't believe it. Until one fucking night, I was sleeping and having a dream. I was downtown walking around, and this man was following me. He had a twisted up eyelid. Everywhere I would look, he was in the crowd as a focal point. All of a sudden, I'm back in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed with this tall man in front of me. In one hand, he had water, continuously pouring it out, and in the other, he had salt. He was talking nonsense until his voice changed and said,
Did you truly believe you could get rid of me? You thought salt and water would banish me?
And he started laughing. It was the most terrifying laugh I've ever heard. It surrounded me. It inflicted pain on my whole body. I woke up drenched in sweat again and ran to my mom and cried that it didn't work. It was back. We blessed the house again, despite what had happened. And that was it. I haven't had another incident since.
Before I begin, I want to be clear about a few things. At the time these events happened, I was in a very negative emotional state. Due to circumstances, I'd rather not explain. I don't believe in ghosts, and I fully acknowledge that what I experienced could have been stress, anxiety, or even delusion. That said, I'm not lying. I'm recounting these events exactly as I experienced and remember them. I've also always had a habit of writing in a more dramatic, almost fictional style. I tend to be verbose and emotional, even when telling true stories. In October of 2016, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I was standing in the living room of my house. Everything was unnaturally dim, and there was no sound at all. No background noise, no breathing, nothing. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, a horrible thought forced its way into my mind. I imagined an ashy gray head. Its chalky skin flaked off in thick chunks. It had no ears, and where its eyes should have been were empty sockets. When I snapped back to awareness, a large portion of the wall in front of me had been replaced by that face. It stared at me without expression. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I woke up yelling. It was around 3:15 in the morning. When I closed my eyes to try to fall back asleep, I saw the same figure again. I eventually started calling it the Gray Man. From that point, whenever it wasn't fully bright outside, closing my eyes meant seeing him. For the next 2 to 3 months, I had nightmares almost every single night. Before and after that period, I rarely had any nightmares at all, which is what makes it so unsettling. Every nightmare was different, but every one just as terrifying. Over time, I grew afraid of sleep itself. I startled at the smallest sounds. I was borderline hypnophobic. I was terrified of falling asleep. And then, things started happening while I was awake. I began seeing a shadowy mist in the corners of my vision. I constantly felt like I was being watched. One day, while talking about the paranormal with my brother, an acoustic guitar that had been resting nearby suddenly violently fell over on its own. Everything came to a head one early morning when I woke up and stepped into the hallway. I looked to my left, toward where the rest of my family was sleeping, and I saw her. She was tall and completely still. She had long, messy black hair, claws for hands, and a face I'll never forget. Her eyes were sunken black dots, and her mouth was filled with countless fangs pulled into a twisted frown. I ran. I sprinted into the living room, screaming. The same room where I had first seen the gray man in my dream. When I looked back, she was gone. My entire family was awake, asking me what was wrong. I couldn't explain it. Even if I tried, they wouldn't have believed me. A few days later, I stopped sleeping in my bedroom altogether. I moved to the couch because every time I went into that room, I felt overwhelming dread. The moment I stopped being in there, I felt better, like a weight had been lifted off me. Within a few weeks, I was sleeping normally again, as if none of it had even happened. I've been a cop for a while now, and this is one of the calls that still haunts me. So, I get a call for a domestic assault that had just occurred, and I learn that the victim is at the neighbor's house. I get there, and I find the female victim's throat has been cut from ear to ear. The neighbor is holding a towel up to her slit throat, and the victim is struggling to breathe. The paramedics are on their way, and I take over holding the towel for the neighbor. I'm trying to apply enough pressure to reduce the bleeding, but not so much pressure that I'm strangling her. It was a delicate balance. Quick law lesson. You know that there are laws against hearsay, right? Basically, I can't testify in court about the events that someone else told me, and I didn't witness. The person who witnessed it would have to testify. One of the exceptions is what's known as the dying declaration. If someone is on their deathbed and believes they're about to die, their statements are exempt from the hearsay rules. I have some serious doubts that this woman is going to live. I want to ask her who slit her throat. In order for it to qualify as a dying declaration, I need to be able to testify that she believes she was about to die. So, I asked her 2 questions. The first was, "Who cut your throat?" which she answered. The second was, "You realize that you may be about to die?" which she answered, "Yes." Our eyes were locked, and I still remember the emptiness in her eyes. Within a few minutes, the medic showed up, and my partner and I went next door to look for the suspect. The door was ajar, and we could hear a baby screaming upstairs. We went in with our guns drawn, and the metallic smell of blood was overpowering. We made our way upstairs, past smeared bloody handprints on the walls, and found the child upstairs. Thankfully, he was unharmed, and the suspect was long gone. Thanks to the excellent performance of the medical staff, the victim survived. I met with her a couple of weeks later, and I was very apprehensive to speak with her again. I had basically looked at her and told her she was going to die. When she opened the door, I could tell that she didn't recognize me. She had very little memory of what happened after she was assaulted. I told her who I was, and she hugged me, crying, and thanked me for saving her life. The suspect ended up pleading guilty, so I never had to testify as to what I told the victim that night. It still haunts me to this day.
I know a lot of people are going to think this is fake, but I swear it's not. I've got my best friend as a witness. This happened a few years ago when I was about 13. I'm 5'7" and about 125 pounds, so I'm pretty small. I usually have pepper spray and a pocket knife on me. I'm embarrassed to say though, in the excitement of exploration with my best friends, I forgot my pepper spray and knife. I love to explore and travel even, or especially, in places I'm not allowed. So when I moved into my new house, of course, one of the first places I explored were the nearby train tracks. So I had my best friend come over one day to explore the new neighborhood with me, and we decided the train tracks were a perfect place to start. We were walking for an hour or two, and it was still light outside, and we had just passed a small neighborhood street, so we felt safe. At one point, for whatever reason, I turned around, and I saw 5 hooded figures following us about 200 feet away. I don't know how I didn't panic. I just tried to pretend I didn't see them, and calmly told my best friend. He immediately turned around and stared them straight down. Once we looked at them, they stopped. So did my friend and I. We all stared at each other for a few seconds, but it might as well have been hours. Finally, they made their move. 3 of them went left and 2 of them went right. We heard the sound of loud and fast footsteps, so we finally snapped out of our trance and ran as fast as we could. We were both in cross country, and that paired with our adrenaline, we ran faster than we ever had before. Luckily, I had explored those same tracks and knew them fairly well. We ran a half-mile up to a bridge that led to a small neighborhood. We somehow made it, with no idea if we were still being followed or not. We continued running until we got to my neighborhood, and didn't feel safe until we were around other people. We slowed our pace and walked home, shaking and exhausted. Looking back now, I regret not telling my parents, but I was scared they wouldn't let me explore alone anymore. But I didn't go on those train tracks again, and I don't think I ever will. I live in a small town in Greece. We live in the area of Macedonia, and this was pointed out to me by my maternal aunt, and I saw it with my own eyes a couple of minutes ago. The time is 11:33 p.m. as I'm typing this. My town doesn't get fogs in the town, only in the surrounding areas. My town is surrounded by farms, mountains, factories, and 2 army bases. We do have humidity, but not so much to cause a fog while surrounded by buildings. My aunt was cleaning her room because she spilled something, and when she opened the balcony door to dust off her duvet, she saw the fog. She called me over to see it, and I instantly took out my phone and started recording. There was something moving in the fog, she said, and I saw it too. Due to the lockdown, our town has curfew, so no one was out and no stores were open, besides the emergency pharmacy and a private birthing clinic that I live close to. It's weird how fast the fog is moving, and the fact that I see something moving in it. I've had a headache the past 3 hours from the moment I went outside. It feels wrong to look at, and it doesn't show up on my camera. I've encountered fog before in other places, and it never felt this dry. It usually feels wet, but this fog feels dry and cold. I have heard scary stories about fogs, but I never believed them and chalked it up to superstition. But this feels different. I hope more doesn't come. Also, there was no weather report saying anything about a fog. I thought I'd share it here. If you have any theories, please let me know. I live alone in a little house in a big city. Kind of a rough around the edges neighborhood, but I lived in the area most of my life, and my block is tight-knit,
in spite of half of it being vacant or abandoned. It's also a city that, like many others, tragically has a lot of folks living out of cars and RVs, trying to eke out an existence. So I shouldn't have been too surprised when, back in October last year, I got a text from a neighbor. You might want to take a look out your back window. About 10 feet away was an enormous 40-foot motorhome in the dead-end alley, sitting right on the edge of the small cliff that is my unfenced backyard. Having lived in urban areas my whole life, I am no stranger to odd happenings immediately outside my window, but this did feel a little more intrusive than living in a ground floor apartment. No thanks to my back window being my bathroom window. It sat there for a few weeks without anyone paying much mind. A few neighbors speculated it might have been someone working on a couple demolition and construction projects in the neighborhood, a supervisor from out of town perhaps. Whomever it was, I didn't really mind, as long as there wasn't any mess, though I was slightly worried a wrong move would end with someone, or the whole vehicle, rolling off the retaining wall and potentially crashing through my wall. Of course, there was a small fact that half the block now couldn't access the alley. My city is very particular about removing vehicles if someone is potentially living in them, and after a few roundabout calls to the parking department, I and my neighbors were told we needed some evidence if it was a hazard or abandoned. So I grabbed a cheap webcam off Amazon and popped it in my window, and then went on with my life. About a week later, after some friends over for dinner had left, I thought I'd check and see if the camera had picked up anything. I didn't sleep for the next few nights. Like clockwork, every night around midnight, the lights in the RV would flick on in the otherwise pitch black night. A couple of cars would pull up behind, and the occupants would unload several very full garbage bags into the RV. Then, these shadowy figures would creep down the yard of the vacant house next door into mine and methodically circle my house, shining flashlights in each window. Cars would come and go all night until about 5 a.m. Then all was business as usual during daylight hours. It's worth mentioning that my house is essentially a studio apartment on top of a garage built into a slope. My bed is about 10 feet from those windows. Also worth mentioning, my neighborhood had an alarming rash of about 20 armed home invasions the summer before, or the arson on an occupied house across the street a few months earlier. Vulnerable was an understatement of how I felt. I ended up moving most of my furniture around my bed as a makeshift barricade. I called 911. They were a bit incredulous. Nothing was actively happening as I called. This wasn't an emergency. I can call the non-emergency line in the morning if I want to speak to an officer or a detective. The next morning, I felt it was prudent to bring in any yard tools that would make a tempting window breaker and double-check the back porch and security flood had working bulbs. And just my luck, I managed to completely break both fixtures in the process. Almost immediately as I walked out of my back door, the RV's door swung open, and a man and woman stepped out. They were dressed in t-shirts and shorts, despite the 39-degree weather, and looked a bit like zombies. I waved. They didn't. They stared past me. I quickly retreated back inside to keep an eye remotely, but not before noticing something even more startling. The RV had about 6 security cameras mounted on it, 3 of which were trained on my back door. I was watching them. They were watching me. After a day or two more of this, I had become fully nocturnal, leaving all the lights blazing all night, and starting to feel like I was losing my mind. This was both mostly benign and deeply unsettling. Texting friends and family in hopes of reassurance, well, didn't do much. They're probably just trying to find a quiet place away from encampments, maybe they work a night shift. If you were living on the streets, wouldn't you want a security camera? You have one on your house. Okay, maybe I was being paranoid. My neighbors were mostly preoccupied with the alley being blocked and subsequent missed deliveries, and it's not like the city was going to do much anyway. The cars kept coming and going all night. The people with flashlights stayed just outside the edge of my yard, but I'd catch the occasional flash through the window. After being reluctant to leave the house and my cat alone, I had to leave for an in-person work meeting. While I was gone, my camera pinged me about activity. The RV folks had set up stakes around my property and were wrapping yellow caution tape around my yard, across the alley, and set up a barricade of traffic cones around their vehicle. This was just getting weird. By this point, a few of us on the block started a group text to keep tabs on things. One neighbor a few houses down caught the female half of this duo in her backyard with a chainsaw, limbing their oak tree in broad daylight. They confronted her, and she gave the same treatment as me. A mute, 1,000-yard stare. The neighbor called it in, and I watched a few officers poke around for a minute, clearly puzzled by the barricades and tape. I thought there might be some imminent resolution. And then they booked it back to their squad car and took off with lights and sirens. And there had been a shooting a few blocks over. I assume they got called to. Another night goes by, punctuated by the RV's alarm going off every couple of hours, and the engine revving menacingly. Though nothing out of the ordinary, at least this ordinary, I take my mid-morning nap I've become accustomed to over the past week, only to be woken by loud, angry yelling. I pull up the camera feed. Out back is another neighbor, the goofy, Dad-cum-ex naval officer, venting his frustrations to a police officer who's banging the RV door with a baton, demanding the occupants come out. There's a brand new sports car parked behind, one that I'd barely made out on my cheap camera's night vision. I carefully left out of the front so as not to be conspicuous, and circled up the mouth of the alley to speak with the officer and explain my story in a near stream of consciousness ramble. Did you see them leave? Nope. I played back the camera. The sports car showed up at around 5:30 a.m., and nobody had left since. He said the car was too new to have a current registration, and the RV was registered to a deceased person 4 counties away. Suspicious, but nothing outright criminal. But he'd ticket them with a 24-hour tow notice. As he was typing up the ticket, the sports car came barreling down the alley in reverse, nearly plowing into the cruiser, and I was told very sternly to leave immediately. I ran home and pulled up a police scanner feed to try and glean some information. They were calling for a gang officer, a domestic violence unit, Vice Squad, CSI. So my gut feeling wasn't too far off the mark. Later that night, the officer called me, asking to send the entirety of my footage. I asked if there was anything he could divulge about what happened. I can't tell you much, but this was a bad dude and he's going away. We towed the car as evidence, but we'll have to wait until morning to get a big enough truck to move the RV. To say I slept well that night was an understatement, but that calm was shattered quite literally early the next morning as I heard glass breaking outside. 3 masked men were breaking into the RV with crowbars. One was up on a ladder, sawing through the roof with an angle grinder. I frantically called 911, struggling to explain the context of what was going on. Once again, met with a verbal eye roll from the call taker. Is it your RV? No? Sir, you can't report a stolen vehicle that isn't yours. I hung up and tried again, hoping to get someone else on the other end. We have a wrecker dispatched to that location. Are you sure these aren't the tow operators? Sure enough, just as these guys managed to get the RV started, the tow truck was coming around the corner. They booked it so fast it ripped up the gravel, and it's a miracle it didn't end up through someone's wall. Well, whatever the absolute fucking hell happened is seemingly over. Again, seemingly, I suppose this is an epilogue of sorts, and by far the most unsettling part of this story. I quickly upgraded my chintzy camera to a couple commercial grade ones with smart object detection, synchronized floodlights, and automatic sirens, hoping I'd rest easy. No, it was going off all the time. At least once or twice a week for over a month, the camera caught creeps skulking around my backyard and windows with flashlights. Plenty of other times, cars idling with the lights off in the alley for unsettlingly long periods. The one I can't shake was the guy at 3 a.m., slowly making his way up the alley in a low crouch, taking a long pause directly behind my house, and then booking it toward my door full steam. Or the guy that managed to get past the camera that I came face to face with, his ugly mug pressed up against my kitchen window at midnight. At least the alarms did their job. Every one of these guys took off once lit up like a stadium with sirens blaring. For some comic relief, that last guy tried to hop a retaining wall and face-planted on the other side. Of course, again, friends and family had some not so reassuring platitudes. Maybe it was someone looking for a lost dog, or someone who got lost in the alley. Or maybe this just always happened before I had lights and cameras, and shaking what little faith I had in law enforcement, the cops, if they showed up at all, were at least an hour late. But here's the kicker. I filed a public request for their arrest and case report, and it got back months later. Turns out my neighbor in the RV had kidnapped his ex-girlfriend and was likely trafficking her. She'd in fact called 911, but didn't know the neighborhood, and the cops are looking for them in a different part of town. He had a lengthy rap sheet for felony burglary, fraud, and firearms charges. An acquaintance of his was interviewed by detectives and said the RV was packed to the gills with guns and improvised weapons. And this guy told this witness that he would come back and kill whoever sent him back to jail. And right at the bottom, in all caps, was my name and address, but phone number redacted, listed as reporting party complainant. The cops searched the sports car and found nothing of note. The RV, as you recall, was apparently stolen before they could even get a valid warrant. The ex fled during the arrest, as I saw on camera, and was never heard from again. The DA dropped the case, and this guy was released from jail 48 hours later. It's been about 6 months since my last visitor at night. There hasn't been a whole lot of peace of mind before I turn in for the night. It's slowly fading, but I can't say I'm not a little on edge after dark. Even in my own home, my house is now completely lit 360 degrees. I've put various dense and/or spiky plantings around my windows and the perimeter, and I sleep with a rifle next to my bed. But fortunately, new folks have moved into the vacant houses on either side of me, and they're also good people. I just don't know if I have the heart to tell them all that went down.
When I was in my early 20s, I lived in a double-wide manufactured home in a trailer park. It was actually a nice little neighborhood, not sketchy, not unsafe, and I felt comfortable living there on my own. A couple of new neighbors moved in 2 houses down from me. They were both older men. One was obese and physically disabled, so I rarely saw him, but he seemed harmless enough. The other one, he gave me the creeps immediately. He would just sit in his Jeep in front of his house and stare at me every time my camera went. No wave, no smile. He just stared. On the 4th of July, late at night, there was a knock at my door. I was expecting my boyfriend, so I was startled when I opened it and saw that neighbor instead. He asked me if I wanted to go watch fireworks with him. I told him no, it was late, the fireworks were over, and I didn't even know him. Then, he stepped closer. At that moment, my large male pit bull stuck his massive head out from behind me. The neighbor immediately stopped, looked at my dog and said,
"Oh, I didn't realize you had a dog. Have a good night."
Then he turned around and left. I was completely creeped out and incredibly grateful for my dog. Over the next few months, there were more small incidents with him. Nothing obvious enough for the police to take seriously, just strange behavior and bad feelings. But I stopped feeling safe in my own home. I reported him to the community manager, but since he'd never technically threatened me, there wasn't much they could do. Then, one winter evening, my boyfriend and I pulled into my driveway and saw the neighbor sitting in his Jeep again, just staring. Suddenly, he got out and rushed toward my truck, banging a metal baseball bat and wrench together while screaming at us. We didn't hesitate. We got out of there immediately, drove straight to the manager's office, and called the police. By the time officers arrived, him and his Jeep were gone. His roommate claimed he had no idea where he went. I was so shaken that I stayed the night at my dad's. The next morning, I got a call from the county sheriff's office asking if I was okay and where I was. They told me there had been an incident involving my neighbor, and because I had reported him the day before, they wanted to make sure I was safe. I rushed back home to find my street lined with police cars and 2 news trucks. That neighbor had returned home later that night and stabbed his roommate more than a dozen times. He's now in prison. The roommate survived for a few days in the ICU, but eventually passed away. I am forever grateful for my dog and for trusting my instincts. That could have been me. I feel so deeply for the roommate who lost his life. Always trust your gut. Always. This happened over a weekend trip to Big Bend, and I still can't shake it. The first night, my girlfriend and I were driving back from dinner. The sky was completely clear, and I decided to pull over at a small roadside turnout to take some photos of the stars. I got out of the car, grabbed my camera gear, and started setting up. That's when I heard a step behind me. Not fast, not heavy, just a single, slow footstep. Too deliberate to be an animal. I called out, "Hello?" and turned around, scanning the area. That's when my girlfriend panicked. She told me, now, to get back in the car. I didn't argue. I grabbed everything and rushed back inside. I hadn't seen anyone or anything, but the feeling hit me hard. This deep, sinking unease in my stomach, like I wasn't supposed to be standing there. I thought about stopping again a few miles down the road, but the feeling wouldn't go away. We went straight back to the hotel. The next night, something else happened. We had been watching the sunset inside the park, and then headed out to grab pizza. By the time we were driving, it was fully dark. As we drove along the road, I noticed something on the shoulder, a shape that looked unnaturally black, darker than the surrounding landscape. At first, I dismissed it. In low light, your mind plays tricks on you. Plants start to look like people, shadows move when they shouldn't. Then, my girlfriend said, "I think that was a person." I hadn't said anything about what I'd seen. She was sitting on the passenger side, closer to the road, and she was confident. She said it wasn't an animal. She was sure it was a person standing there. I wasn't convinced, so we decided to drive past our hotel and loop back, just to see if it was still there. When we passed the spot again, there was nothing. Whatever it was, human, animal, or something else, it had moved. Big Bend is massive.
quiet, dark in a way that feels heavy. And out there, sometimes it feels like you're not as alone as you think. My parents bought our house in the 1990s. In my bedroom, an old built-in radio from the 60s would only pick up one station. It played Can't Help Falling in Love by Elvis Presley on a loop, day and night, 24/7. And we thought it was quirky. Years later, I learned that local station had lost its license and shut down in 1968. The radio hadn't been plugged in since we moved in. This incident happened a couple of weeks after my family and I moved into our new home. The house was built in the early 90s on land that used to be a big cornfield for many years. We were the first family to live in it. One night, as I'm sleeping in my new bedroom, I awoke to a feeling of absolute sheer terror. I was facing toward my closet, and I saw something crouched down in the corner of my room. It was just sitting there, staring directly at me. I knew it was something that was very evil, because the air in the room felt suffocating, and every part of my body was on full alert. I was just a little kid, but to me, this thing looked like a cross between a goblin and a gargoyle. That's the only way I could describe it at the time. Most of its features were obscured, but what I remember most was what looked like a stunted snout protruding from its face and really big lips. Weird, I know, but that's what I distinctly remember seeing. All I wanted to do was run, so that's what I did. I threw back my covers, praying my legs wouldn't get tangled up in them, jumped out of bed, and bolted down the hallway and into my parents' bedroom. I was screaming and crying, and my parents went into my room, turned the lights on, and of course, nothing was there. They were convinced I just had a nightmare, but no, I was definitely awake. It was hands down the creepiest experience I ever had.